Chapter 1054. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation, but in the end, he didn't achieve the result he wanted. Instead, he was disappointed again and again, and failed again and again. With all his anger added together, the young city lord directly attacked Xuelan. The puppet didn't know any fancy moves, but the power brought by every move was extremely huge. However, Qin Yu, who was fighting against the puppet, was even a level higher. The power that leaked out from the two of them during their fight was extremely terrifying. It could shock the ages and cause a shocking change in heaven and earth. I can even kill a dragon. Let's see if I can kill you. The stronger the enemy's strength, the stronger the fighting spirit in Qin Yu's heart. Naturally, the strength he displayed was also stronger. He was afraid that the enemy's strength was much stronger than his. But he didn't fall into a disadvantage and took advantage of it countless times. Compared to the big and small wounds on the puppet's body and his spotless body, the difference was obvious. But this was still not enough. It was too much of a waste of time. He had to drag it out like this. He didn't know how long it would take. It wasn't rare for a battle between ordinary experts to last for 3 days and 3 nights. If that kind of relationship was familiar and they were at the same level, they would fight and rest. It was even normal for them to fight for 10 days to half a month. But obviously, there were uncertain factors in this underground city. If this continued, it would definitely be disadvantageous. Qianjin Shenron hadn't appeared because he had been suppressed. The other two Shenron naturally felt that it had nothing to do with him. Moreover, Qin Yu only took advantage of it from the beginning to the end and didn't suffer any losses. At the very least, it appeared that Qin Yu would definitely be able to win this battle. It was only a matter of time. But if this continued, the young city lord might have some backup methods. Otherwise, it wouldn't be as calm as it was now. He wasn't in a hurry to find other people. Obviously, he had other plans. "Master, do you want me to come out and help you?" Although he was only in the state of a young dragon, there was no way to use all his strength. But against a puppet that hadn't reached the realm of a true god, it wasn't a difficult thing. Whenever Shenron attacked, he would cooperate with Qin Yu. It was not difficult to take down the puppet. In less than half a day, they would be able to capture both of them alive and at their disposal. Since this is my own opponent, I naturally don't need you to act. If I didn't pursue strength, why would I prepare to gather the 9 great Shenron? Qin Yu felt as if a fire had ignited in his heart, and it could burn him up at any time. There was actually a faint resonance between heaven and earth. A powerful aura spread out from his body. This aura caused everyone in the underground city to tremble. First, it was the puppet's terrifying aura. It was once again the aura of a breakthrough that Qin Yu was displaying. The entire underground city was in chaos. Everyone was trying to find out who these two masters were. Where did this expert come from? They had actually started fighting in the underground city. What surprised everyone even more was that the young city lord did not show up from the beginning to the end. Many people couldn't find the young city lord, so they had no choice but to search the entire city. As soon as he got close to the city lord's mansion, they were directly sent flying by the powerful force. If it weren't for the aftermath of the battle, they would have been killed on the spot. But when they got closer, some people could see the figures fighting in the air. The hidden experts all appeared in shock. Under the watchful eyes of countless people, Qin Yu felt the transformation brought about by the improvement. Now he had improved his strength to senzuns in one go. He originally had an extremely strong ability. Now he had broken through to this level in one go. It was also a result of his accumulation. Without the previous accumulation, it would be impossible to break through completely in one go. Now we're at the same level. Let's fight again. That's fair. The young city lord had a bad premonition in his heart. Qin Yu, whose strength had not improved to senzuns, could faintly have the upper hand. Now that he had broken through, wouldn't he be stronger than before? Every time one broke through a major realm, it would bring about a qualitative improvement. The two could not be mentioned in the same breath. If Qin Yu broke through at this juncture, he would be the one who had to bear the greatest risk. Ben Shualan was entangled with her and attacked her from a distance. It was just restricting him so that he couldn't do anything secretly. No matter how exasperated he was, he couldn't do anything at this moment. The feeling of powerlessness was really not good, but he couldn't even cut off his means of retreat. The puppet didn't feel anything. Even if it was made into a puppet alive, it only retained its former knowledge and some fighting methods. In the eyes of some people who weren't very familiar with it, this was the city lord being forced to come out of seclusion. Only a small number of his confidants felt a little out of place. Not only did the city lord's strength improve, but he also didn't seem to have much sanity. Maybe this was an illusion, but once it was confirmed that their guess was true. Then why did the city lord suddenly lose his sanity? Was there something they didn't know about? Some people turned their attention to the young city lord. If there was anyone who was most likely to know the truth of all this, the young city lord was the first to bear the brunt. After all, he was the one who arranged these things. He was also the one who announced the news that the city lord was in seclusion. Now that it hadn't been a long time, only he could get the truth. These people were speculating, and the discussion didn't stop from beginning to end. The city lord's strength seems to have improved a lot, and it has reached such a terrifying level. Sure enough, there were some breakthroughs in this seclusion. If there were no true gods in the world, with the city lord's current strength, I'm afraid he would be invincible. After Qin Yu's improvement, his attacks were more violent. Even if it was the same move, there was a different feeling when he used it now. Even dominating Heaven Blade began to identify with him more than a little. In the past, he felt that dominating Heaven Blade was just a weapon in his hand. Now, dominating Heaven Blade took the initiative to bow to him. It had truly become a weapon that he could use in his hands. Under this situation, the city lord's left arm was directly cut off by him. And he was still the same as before. Except that the wind was slightly strong, blowing his hair and robe. His body could almost be called meticulous. Not to mention a little injury. The city lord had been refined into a puppet and lost some of his flexibility. He didn't have the qualifications to hurt him at all. At this moment, suddenly, a huge hole opened up. On the other side of the hole, it was dark and chaotic. Breaking through the void, Shentian Senzun rushed over quickly. When he arrived, he saw his disciple's heroic and domineering aura. Chapter 1055. An expert that suddenly appeared. It seemed to make the chaotic situation even more chaotic. Under everyone's gaze, Shentian Senzun slowly walked. But in the blink of an eye, he came next to Qin Yu. Why didn't you say anything to Master, and came out to train by yourself? Qin Yu took back his hand, and put aside the puppets that the city master had forged. Shentian Senzun appeared in front of him safe and sound. This meant that his breakthrough was a success. His presence did not seem to have become more terrifying. But his eyes seemed to be able to hold thousands of stars and world. When one reached true God, they could hold the rare spacetime of the world. The realms above true God were not accurately divided. It only depended on each person's comprehension level. What they comprehended was time and space, the two most difficult powers to understand in the world. If one wanted to break through true God and reach a higher level, they needed to create a world with life on their own. This was not a little void world. Instead, it was a lively small kiliocosm with unlimited potential for development. If this little world developed into a middle world, their strength would increase again. If they could create a great world with their own power, they could rule over countless middle worlds, flatten the stars, and live forever. Shenron of the 9 great essences sought this. But after being silent for a long time, he could not find a chance to break through. His strength was not much different from when he had just broken through. So true God is such a realm. Qin Yu gained 2 more comprehensions in his heart. His strength had once again increased by a small amount. Originally, he had been pursuing the improvement of his mental state. Along the way, he had seen many things happen in Flame World. His understanding of the world had deepened. Now, after hearing Shen Tian Celestial Venerable's persuasion naturally, there was another breakthrough. It seemed very fast, but everything was based on evidence. Shen Tian Senzun did not conceal his voice. There were also many experts who had rushed over and heard what he said. They were shocked by Senzun's strength. On the other hand, he had gained a deeper understanding of his current realm. Hearing these words, Zhongxian nodded. In the future, if one of them wanted to break through to the true God realm, wouldn't that give him more confidence? Xiantian Senzun, who had expected all of this, only smiled and did not explain. These people had nothing to do with him. If they wanted to take advantage of him, then so be it. If it was useful to his disciple, it might not be useful to these people. Qin Yu naturally possessed an extremely high level of talent. He had long reached the point where he should have understood these things. And those people were not that talented. Now, if one wanted to understand the truth of the world that only true gods could understand, this step was a little too big. If no one could set things right for them, they had always believed that what they thought was right. If he really tried to break through to true God, they would only die because they were not prepared enough. Without reaching true divinity and without exceptional talent, his comprehension ability was not enough. Naturally, he could not understand the true meaning of these words. He was also unable to sense the mysteries of the higher realms. The young city lord did not let the puppet stop. The city lord puppet, which had already lost its left arm, continued to charge without any change in expression. Even if it had already shed a lot of blood. Half of the robe on its body had already been dyed dark red. Still, its expression did not change as it continued to bury its head and charge. It seemed that it did not even want its life, just to perish together with Qin Yu. More and more people felt that something was wrong. Such a selfish and ruthless person like the city lord would definitely not perish together. If it was as usual. The city lord, who had always been able to advance and retreat, was able to yield and stand tall. He would put down his pride and be proud of a true expert. No matter how dissatisfied he was in his heart, he would only stab a knife in the back. And not expose himself in front of everyone like this. This would only let the experts have something on him, so that he would have to pay a huge price. These doubts could not affect the puppet's movements at all. Even if they sensed that something was wrong, the experts in the underground city still chose to bide their time. This expert who suddenly appeared seemed to have reached the true God realm. At least, he was only one step away from the true God realm. However, the city lord's aura now seemed to be extremely powerful and terrifying. At least, he was only one step away from the true God realm. Two super experts who were only one step away from the true God realm gathered together. It was not certain who would win and who would lose. If the city lord won, by then, as a part of the underground city, they would naturally be able to get a share of the loot. If they stood on the wrong side at this time, it would be an extremely bad deal. After analyzing the strengths of each of them, Zhongxian felt that it was too dangerous. None of these experts were willing to make a move. This time, if they made a move, they would only suffer a huge loss, so they might as well not make a move for the time being. This way, they might be able to choose a side in the end. They might be able to gather a large number of benefits for themselves. Because of this, they did not have the intention to make a move. Xiantian Senzun was extremely disdainful. It was just a puppet. No matter how strong the puppet's strength was, it could only helplessly feel that it was constantly being instigated by others. However, there was still one more interesting thing. Xiantian Senzun's vision was, of course, extremely high. At a glance, he could tell that this puppet was refined by an extremely cruel method. And it was precisely because of this method that it could retain some of the original owner's characteristics. If he wanted to recover his consciousness, although it would be a little troublesome. But it wasn't impossible. Disciple, do you think I should directly kill this guy? If you don't want to kill this guy, then I'll give him a chance to live. A chance to let him regain his consciousness. This time, the young city lord already felt that something was extremely wrong. It seemed that something was far beyond his control. But now, he had no ability to stop all of this. All the attacks were blocked by Xuelan. Xuelan did nothing but stared at him, not letting him secretly make a move. This was already enough for him to drink a pot of wine. The confidence in Xiantian Senzun's tone was too strong. Qin Yu didn't have the slightest doubt. To speak of it, Only the young city lord had some grudges with him. And his strength had increased. He could feel that this puppet was refined by the city lord. It was no threat to him at all. With the passage of time, he could definitely win. So the last bit of training was completely useless. You can do whatever you want. It has nothing to do with me. Xian Tian Senzun already had an idea in his heart. He directly waved his hand and revealed countless precious materials. But he didn't hesitate to use them on this stranger. It was just to make things more interesting. The young city lord had been forced to the extreme. Fortunately, he still had a trump card that he had been hiding. Chapter 1056. The dark green arrow was thrown out fiercely. As long as such a sharp arrow pierced into the body, even if it was just a light scratch on the skin, it would cause a huge change. Even an expert would not be able to stop it. This poison was famous and could not be resisted. The young city lord's face did not show his success. The profound heaven celestial venerable waved his sleeve and returned the attack without missing a single bit. All the attacks fell on the young city lord himself. The young city lord was poisoned and only had one breath left. Originally, he thought that he would succeed, but he failed so thoroughly. If the method he used was not so vicious, it would be better. But the method he used was too vicious. And when all of this fell on his head, he felt it. What a hopeless situation this was. Countless heavenly materials and earthly treasures were arranged in an extremely special ratio. The remaining consciousness in the city lord puppet's body was completely outlined. Although there was still a part missing. However, he still remembered the scenes before his death very clearly. This part was not important, but he had temporarily forgotten some of the details of his memories. These were not important. And unprecedented, his hatred for his own flesh and blood had reached the peak. There was no absolute kinship in the underground city to begin with. Although he had single-handedly nurtured the young city lord, it was also because the young city lord himself had caught his eye. But he had painstakingly nurtured this little brat. He had actually bitten off a piece of flesh from his body. This was something he could not tolerate. If it were not for the help of an expert this time, he would have to watch himself be controlled by the young city lord forever. He would be treated as a puppet by this ingrate, as a stepping stone to the top. You are really amazing. I have nurtured you for more than 2,000 years, but I did not realize that you were so ruthless in your bones that you could even attack me. The young city lord knew that he would not be able to get through this. He smiled bitterly and said whatever he wanted to say. Since he had already reached this point, he was not worried that he would suffer retribution one day. He was very clear about the power of the poison. There must be no cure. Then why did he still have to be afraid? Anyway, it was just a word of death. So what if he died a more miserable death and didn't even have a corpse left? That's right, I was the one who did it. Furthermore, I've been planning this for more than 500 years. I've gathered an unknown amount of materials before I took action. You should be glad that you have the right to do so, and you are my most perfect creation. If it wasn't for someone suddenly jumping out and interrupting my plan, you wouldn't even have this last bit of consciousness left. Now, the situation was clear. Out of nowhere, some powerful experts jumped out. One after another, they called out City Lord. His attitude towards Xian Tian Senzun was even more respectful. Anyone with a discerning eye could see that their attitude towards the City Lord could only be said to be good. However, it was a little perfunctory. However, when it came to the mysterious Sky Senzun, it was a genuine attempt to curry favor with him. She wished she could be a peasant that was spurned by others. In any case, as long as he could stay by the side of an expert, it didn't matter whether he was a bumpkin or not. Even the slightest thing revealed by a powerhouse was enough to benefit them for the rest of their lives. Not to mention a true god powerhouse. If they had his guidance, they might be able to go to a higher realm one day to take a look. After all, some of his experience and occasional words and actions. It was enough for them to learn well. They would definitely benefit a lot if they recorded every single move they made. The city lord took note of this in his heart. However, he didn't dare to show the slightest disrespect towards Xian Tian Senzun. Now, he knew his own situation. Although his strength had increased a lot, if it wasn't for Xian Tian Senzun awakening his consciousness. He might even have to be reduced to a human-shaped weapon like this for the rest of his life. There might even be many people who would snatch him away. And these experts who appeared later were one of the people who might use him as a weapon. With his intelligence, he could naturally guess that after his matter was exposed, how many people would want to get their hands on such a thing that he wouldn't resist. Moreover, he would be a loyal guard with absolute strength. As long as he could get such a powerhouse as a guard by his side, they would be able to go to some very dangerous places. They would obtain many heaven and earth treasures. And they wouldn't have to worry about being bitten back. And they wouldn't have to worry about being betrayed. There was simply no puppet in this world. Moreover, it was a powerful puppet. It was even more suitable for him. He suffered a pain that was worse than death for a few days and nights. In the end, the city lord still remembered the young city lord and hated him. He turned his head and directly knelt down in front of Qin Yu and Xian Tian Senzun. I will never forget the kindness of being reborn. I beg the two of you to help me detoxify the poison in the unfilial wolf cub's body. I am willing to pay any price for it, no matter how strong he looked, and how fearless he was. The young city lord also wanted to live a safe and sound life. Now that he saw some hope, he couldn't help but look at Qin Yu with a little hope. But soon, he knew that living was not better than dying. For the current him, dying might be more satisfying than living. But how could he be willing to die? Presumably, as long as he lived, everything that would belong to him in the future. Moreover, he would be able to obtain all of them without leaving a single one behind. But if he gave up his life just like that, perhaps he wouldn't have to suffer those hardships, but he wouldn't have a meteoric rise one day. He would have a chance to become a master again. He could hibernate for so long and plan for so long. In the end, he would pay any price to stand at the top. Now, he could naturally endure humiliation, so even if he knew that it might be better to die, he gritted his teeth and didn't die. Xian Tian Senzun was interested. The reason why he paid some price to awaken the last remaining will in the depths of the puppet's heart. Didn't he just think that this matter might be interesting? And it didn't disappoint him. This matter was indeed very interesting. It's not difficult to detoxify it, but the price to pay is not small. And from then on, it will cause irreversible damage to his body. The city lord had made up his mind. Anyway, he wouldn't get a better result now. Since this guy had tortured him to such a state. Even if he had to pay the price of his life, he would take revenge. The young city lord already regretted it when he heard about the irreversible damage. But the moment he hesitated just now, he had already missed the best opportunity to commit suicide. Chapter 1057. At this moment, his resistance was unsuccessful. He was directly pressed down by the city lord to Qin Yu's feet. Xian Tian Senzun made his move. He directly used his most powerful strength. He violently stripped away the traces of poison in the young city lord's body. Of course, such a powerful force had passed through the young city lord's body once. He was basically half a cripple. Although his strength was still there, his realm kept falling. Half of his accumulation over countless years was destroyed just like that. And from then on, he didn't have the ability to continue improving. Although he could be considered an expert in the outside world. But after that, his future was completely destroyed. As a former proud son of heaven, the young city lord didn't dare to admit it. He was also unwilling to accept himself like this. Kill me, idiot Shao, have you forgotten how I cut open your flesh inch by inch and drained the blood from your body? Have you forgotten how I used top-notch treasures to keep you alive? I chopped off your limbs and reinstalled special parts for you. I made you become like this, neither human nor ghost, neither dead nor alive. The city lord was indeed very angry. But it was precisely because he had suffered so much that he had to resist. He wanted this unfilial son to enjoy the pain he had suffered. Now that he was neither human nor ghost, neither dead nor alive, of course, he wanted the young city lord to become like him. And he wanted to return it 1,000 times, 100 times, 10,000 times while maintaining his consciousness. Even if he had to pay a huge price, he wouldn't hesitate. He didn't know when this feud between father and son would end. Xiantian Senzun only removed a portion of the poison. The good show had just begun. And it was obvious that this interesting story wouldn't end for at least 1,000 years. There would be an end to the mutual torture of the father and son. After dealing with these small matters, Xiantian Senzun directly brought Qin Yu to a place with beautiful mountains and clear waters. Lava was everywhere here, but the strange thing was that the temperature was normal. It was even as warm as spring. Although there was fiery red lava everywhere, there were also many plants growing. There was even a patch of green, as if the two could coexist peacefully. You seem to have found all 3 major cities in Shenron in such a short time. Your progress is quite fast. If I'm not wrong, you're here for Yanli Shenron, right? Qin Yu collected 3 Shenron. He felt that his progress was only average. He wasn't dissatisfied, but he wasn't overjoyed either. However, it was clear that he would have to speed up the process. His strength had already broken through. There was no reason to waste time on the road. Kanshui Shenron, Sora Shenron, Chenjin Shenron. All they felt was a powerful aura. This powerful aura even made them feel some fear. Especially now that it was still in its infancy, although its future was limitless. But at least now, Chenjin Shenron was the weakest. Senzun was most wary of Xian Tian. There was a huge difference between one true god and another true god. In particular, the division of realms was rather vague. Almost everyone's path was not the same. Some people barely improved, but it was only a lower level. Some people broke through easily, but they already had super strong strength. Obviously, Xian Tian Senzun was the latter. Although his strength had just broken through, it was extremely powerful. Even Shenron had to admit. If they really fought, Xian Tian Senzun might be better. Kanshui Shenron still hadn't forgotten why he signed the contract in a daze. Qin Yu's strength was extremely strong, making him helpless was one thing. Also, Xian Tian Senzun was restraining him from the side, making him unable to move freely. At that time, Xian Tian Senzun, who hadn't broken through yet, was able to affect him. Now that he had broken through, he was at least on the same level as him. Then, I naturally have to give you a gift after coming out of seclusion. Originally, I had already prepared a gift, but now I suddenly want to add something to this gift. Xian Tian Senzun laughed heartily. The shadow of a large hand appeared in the sky. It slowly fell into the magma and continued to explore without any care. Xian Tian Senzun suddenly clenched his fist. That shadow also clenched his fist. It pulled out a struggling little snake. Yanli Shenron had tried his best to hide, but he couldn't escape from this big hand. Shenron struggled and roared. Suddenly, it stretched and expanded, stretching for tens of thousands of miles, and kept growing. If someone raised their head, no matter where they were, they would be able to see Shenron's shadow. If it was closer, it would even cover the sky. There was not a trace of sunlight around. Only the almost endless dragon body could be seen. Under this incomparably huge body, Xian Tian Senzun's figure seemed incomparably small. But his aura was extremely strong. At least standing under this shadow, he was equally eye-catching. Like a firefly in the dark night, it kept flashing. Countless gazes fell on him. Countless scorching magma appeared all over Yanli Shenron's body. It was not like the gentleness of the magma that floated on the surface at the beginning. All of them carried an extremely high temperature. If touched, one would die. But Xian Tian Senzun still only gently grasped. The shadow of the hand in the void grew infinitely. Once again, Shenron, who had always been trying to escape, was caught in the palm of his hand as if he was holding a small insect. At this point, Yanli Shenron was completely unable to move. Under this strong pressure, he could only continue to shrink and shrink. He returned to the size when he was first caught. Although he was also 100 feet long, he was only the size of an ordinary dragon. It was not enough to cover the sky, and his aura was weak. Yanli Shenron looked at the group of people in front of him weakly. What do you want to do? I just want to quietly stay by myself. Compared to others, I am already extremely honest and dutiful. I sleep all year round and do my job well. Xian Tian Senzun had no intention to argue with him about this. If he had great strength, why would there be so many questions? Your duty has nothing to do with me. I just want to take the gift you gave to my disciple as a gift. You can be dissatisfied, because that will not affect the result. In the midst of intense unwillingness, Yanli Shenron had no choice but to force out a drop of his blood essence and force it to recognize him as its master. The group of Shenron who had long submitted felt a chill down their backs. If they had been tactless in the beginning, would they have ended up like this? Even if they could resist for a while and escape, in the end, they would all be captured in the end. As long as Qin Yu wanted to gather the 9 great Shenron, with such a master, he would be able to achieve his goal. Moreover, his talent was even more monstrous. Obviously, after breaking through to the true God realm, his strength would be heaven-defying. Chapter 1058. Xian Tian Senzun was very satisfied with the effect of his actions. Originally, he wanted to give these restless Shenron a good warning. Of course, he also wanted to use this opportunity to give them a decent gift. Coincidentally, Yanli Shenron's tracks were discovered by him. It could be said that he had bumped into him. Yanli Shenron did not know why he would suddenly be in trouble. But no one could give him an answer. Now that he had forced them to recognize him as their master, there was no room for regret. Qin Yu did not refuse. Originally, he wanted to gather the 9 great Shenron. Even if it was a help, it was also Xian Tian Senzun's care for him. It would not be good if he refused. After all, there were many Shenron, enough for him to practice. Previously, he had his master's help. But now, he did not need it anymore. His strength had increased again and again. Now, he was confident that he could single-handedly find Shenron. And he had a high chance of winning. Qin Yu, whose strength had already increased, quickly increased that drop of essence blood again. He directly rushed to the middle stage. And this strength was enough to look down on all heroes. The previous city lord was no threat to him. With his current strength, if he met the previous city lord of the underground city, he could destroy him in minutes. Not to mention a threat, he could not even be considered an opponent. After Yanli Shenron became Qin Yu's subordinate, he saw some of his former friends. Only then did he know that Qin Yu was the one who had defeated several great Shenron experts by himself. Thus, he calmed down and stopped thinking about how to resist. Originally, he could not resist Xian Tian Senzun. Now that he saw a few Shenron who were in the same situation as him, he had no intention to resist. Even if he wanted to resist, he wanted all of Shenron to resist. With his strength alone, not to mention resisting, he might not even be able to survive. With Xian Tian Senzun's strength, it was not difficult to kill him. Xian Tian Senzun and Shualan waited for half a day. Qin Yu's strength had been raised to the middle stage. His realm was stable, and his aura was strong. It was only because the mysterious Sky Senzun was present that the aura didn't leak out. Therefore, very few people knew what was going on here. He thought that everything was peaceful, but he didn't know that there was another super expert standing at the peak of the world. Yanli Shenron was just a casual encounter. The real gift is this. I see that with your current rate of improvement, you'll be able to use this soon. A pure and flawless fruit appeared in Shentian Senzun's hand. Then, the fruit split into 2, becoming 2 of similar size. Furthermore, the aura of the fruit had also fused into 1. One could tell at a glance that this fruit was no ordinary fruit. There were also some fine lines on it that were faintly discernible. Only a few people could tell how many lines there were on it. Those who were able to see these patterns were all extremely talented. Of course, those who were able to stand at the top were all extremely talented. But even so, they could clearly see how many lines there were on the fruit. What kind of pattern did these lines change? The entire ninefold God realm added together could only do it with one hand. Shentian Senzun and Qin Yu could see all the details on it without any hindrance, as well as those fine lines that couldn't be seen in the eyes of others. This fruit seems to contain some of the principles of heaven and earth. The lines on it are like ancient words. It must have an extraordinary origin, and there's also a faint trace of the aura of a great tribulation. Qin Yu recognized that this fruit must have something to do with Shentian Senzun's breakthrough. But he couldn't tell what it was for the time being. The heavenly tribulation fruit only existed in legends, and there were only some records. And there were no pictures of the real thing. Nowadays, it was almost impossible to recognize the heavenly tribulation fruit. Only Shentian Senzun knew what the heavenly tribulation fruit looked like. After all, this fruit grew bit by bit under his gaze. Naturally, he knew very well what it was in his hands. It can only increase the success rate of passing the tribulation. With this fruit, it can help the two of you lay a solid foundation. The so-called immediately was to communicate with heaven and earth and bear the power of all things in one's body. To be able to bear the power of God. To be able to cross this hurdle in one fell swoop. Although it seemed dangerous, it wasn't completely without a shortcut. If one learned one of the two major powers of time and space, one could gain an advantage. If one continuously refined one's body in advance, one could also increase the success rate. It was just that one of the two required luck, and the other required great perseverance. But the heavenly tribulation fruit was different. It contained a trace of God's power. And it was extremely gentle. This was also a supreme shortcut. Countless people wanted to get this fruit, but there was no way to find it. Almost everyone who wanted to break through to the true God realm wished they could use all their wealth and even their lives in exchange for this fruit. Because as long as they had this fruit, they might succeed in breaking through. They would obtain endless years of life. They would truly be able to look down on the heavens and break through all the void. This was something that no one could resist. If he held up such a fruit, Shentian Senzun could even exchange it for countless loyal subordinates. With this fruit as a reward, it could cause chaos in the world and countless people would die on the battlefield. It depended on how to use it. Qin Yu refused such a powerful cheating tool without the slightest hesitation. Just now, he didn't know what it was, so he was prepared to accept it. But now that he knew, he could directly reject it with a smile. Because he never needed the help of any external objects. With his strength, with his talent. It was only a matter of time before he broke through to the true God realm. It was the same whether there was external help or not. Since that was the case, why would he take this fruit? Anyway, this is a gift from Master to you. You may not need it, but you can give it to Shualan. Shentian Senzun smiled slightly and looked back and forth between the two of them. Shualan's face, which had always been clear and flawless, turned pink. Then, Shentian Senzun didn't say anything more. He directly threw the heavenly calamity fruit into Qin Yu's hands. It steadily fell into Qin Yu's hands. This matter was temporarily over. Anyway, he couldn't get back what he had given away. No matter what Qin Yu would do with this fruit, he didn't care. Even if it was to cause chaos in the world, as long as Qin Yu wanted. So what if he really caused chaos in the world? He was Shentian Senzun's proudest disciple. In this world, he could naturally do whatever he wanted, and no one could stop him. No one had the qualifications to stop him. As long as he, the master, stood behind him, he would unconditionally support his disciple. Everyone who went against his disciple was also his enemy. Thank you, master. Qin Yu accepted it safely. Chapter 1059. An expert had broken through to true God realm. This news seemed to have grown wings and spread from an unknown place. In an instant, it spread to all places. Everyone in the ninefold God realm learned of this news. No one was able to suppress their curiosity. They were all shocked and wanted to find out the identity of the mysterious expert. But they were disappointed. Only in the flame world, there was a thread of information. But it was just a thread. No one was sure if the expert that had appeared once was him or not. That peerless expert that had broken through to true God realm. Because just an instant was not enough to prove anything. Many people put this matter aside for the time being. Then they did their best to find Shentian Senzun's whereabouts. If they could get some experience and guidance, they would pay any price. Of course, at the same time, some people were being pursued by countless people. These people all held a ripe fruit in their hands. It was different from the heaven tribulation fruit. Once the earth tribulation fruit ripened, there would be a dozen fruits. Everyone present at the time had more or less taken one. Among them, the strongest had even obtained 2 fruits. After that, they scattered. But the news was still leaked. It was a person who was carelessly captured. The news he leaked betrayed everyone else. But in the end, he still died. The entire ninefold god realm was shocked. That was a legendary treasure that could increase the chances of breaking through. Who did not want to get it? Especially those old monsters who were nearing the end of their lifespans and were about to die. They wanted this treasure the most to help them break through. Only by breaking through to a higher realm could they have the strongest power. Only then could they break away from their current inhuman state. Even Senzun had a fixed lifespan. However, compared to ordinary people, it was unknown how many times more it was. As powerful experts, they were all old monsters who had lived for tens of thousands of years. He also wanted to obtain this supreme treasure the most. The treasure was their last hope. Naturally, no one was willing to let go of this hope. In order to achieve this goal, they all acted. Countless experts came out of seclusion. The present situation was chaotic. Even if the true heaven tribulation fruit had not appeared, and the true owner of the heaven tribulation fruit had not appeared, the world was still in chaos. Someone wanted to break through. These people who wanted to break through all wanted to use external objects to increase their chances of breaking through. If he had the guts to break through without the help of external objects, then he would be able to do so. He wouldn't have wasted so much time until he was on the brink of death before he saw a glimmer of hope. And among these old monsters, there were actually many people that Shen-Tian Senzun was familiar with. Looking at them, they were all dogs biting each other. Since he was fighting over a few earth tribulation fruits, he laughed heartily. In any case, he was just going to sit on the mountain and watch the tiger fight, so why should he interfere? But soon, he couldn't smile anymore. Seeing those experts fighting to the death over a few fellows, Yi Zichen couldn't help but sigh. Qin Yu had another idea in his mind. Was there any better time to train than now? At the center of those experts, countless sand was blown away. A chaotic battle. The majestic power could shatter mountains, rivers, and seas. If he could gain a foothold in that place, he would be able to compete with countless experts to determine victory or defeat. Wouldn't that be the best experience? Moreover, the appearance of experts would often cause countless changes. It would be best if he could use this chaos to increase his strength. You have to know that those places are very chaotic. If you are besieged, these old monsters all have their own trump cards. They have lived for nearly 100,000 years. Which one of them doesn't have countless trump cards in their hands? You can't kill them or beat them. Listen to me. Don't get involved this time. What's so fun about these people? Why don't you go to other places? Maybe you can find something interesting. But Qin Yu had already made up his mind. Even Shen-Tian Senzun couldn't stop him. Since he had already made up his mind, no one could stop him. Moreover, there were many dangers in those chaotic places. Only then could he increase his strength. Let his strength continue to increase. It wasn't to increase his realm, but to increase his combat experience. Just as Shen-Tian Senzun said, those old monsters all had countless trump cards. It just so happened that it was perfect for the trial. Otherwise, he was worried that his strength would increase too quickly, and these people wouldn't be able to let him fight to his heart's content. Fight to his heart's content. Seeing that Qin Yu had indeed made up his mind, Shen-Tian Senzun didn't say anything else and just let him go. Anyway, with his master around, no matter what happened, he could quickly rush over. Moreover, to be honest, those old monsters are more powerful than Qin Yu. They only had the trump cards accumulated over countless years. If one really counted, whether it was talent or strength, they might not be as strong as Qin Yu. At least in that place, Qin Yu wouldn't encounter any danger. This was enough. Shen-Tian Senzun didn't say anything else and let Qin Yu go. At the crucial moment, he gave him a small jade pendant. It was only the size of a palm, but it could block attacks below the true god level. As long as one didn't reach the true god level, they wouldn't be able to break through the defense. This was indeed an extremely precious item. Even if Shen-Tian Senzun wanted to polish such a jade pendant, it would also take a lot of effort. Not to mention other people. They couldn't break the defense of this jade pendant at all. It was just that Qin Yu was confident in his own strength, and he knew what level his strength had reached. This jade pendant was just SOSO to him. But if Shualan wanted to go with him, this jade pendant couldn't be more suitable. At least it could prevent someone from sneaking an attack on Shualan at the crucial moment. He could also let go of his fists and feet without any worries. Shualan naturally decided to follow Qin Yu without the slightest hesitation. Shentian Senzun saw that the two of them were so close that they were inseparable wherever they went. He revealed a kind smile again. He wasn't prepared to interfere with the happiness of the younger generation. Since Qin Yu had made his own decision, he wasn't prepared to interfere. Of course, he had already done what he could do as a master. He secretly left a tracking talisman on Qin Yu's body. It was extremely small and difficult to discover. This was to ensure Qin Yu's safety. If he encountered any powerful forces, this tracking talisman would immediately send Qin Yu's location to him. He could immediately break through the void and rush over. So no matter what, he couldn't continue to stop him. Since he had already made all the preparations, he had no fear. Go, go, I knew I couldn't keep you. Even with my current realm, you will be able to surpass it soon. Chapter 1060. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. Xuantian Senzun had always known how outstanding his disciple was. If it wasn't for that accident in the middle, the disciple that he was most proud of should have achieved what he had today. It was a pity that he wasted another 10,000 years. That was the thing that hurt him the most, but it seemed that he had put in a lot of effort. Qin Yu's temperament was stronger, and it was easier for him to break through later. He didn't know if it was good or bad. Of course, Qin Yu's own efforts were absolutely indispensable for him to achieve what he had today. The effort that he put in was absolutely unimaginable for ordinary people. Talent was extremely important. But along the way, he had also experienced many dangers and obtained countless opportunities. No matter when, I'm the disciple that you can proudly say out loud. Before Qin Yu left, he bowed to Shentian Senzun. With such a disciple, he had no regrets in his life. The little bit of sadness in Shentian Senzun's eyes completely disappeared without a trace. With everything that he had now, there was no need to be sad at all. On the contrary, he should be proud to have such an outstanding disciple. Indeed, as Qin Yu said, he could proudly shout out loud. With such a sentence, he was already satisfied. After Qin Yu left, Shentian Senzun couldn't help but stroke his beard. Looking at the backs of Qin Yu and Shualan as they left, he sighed with emotion. How can there be such an outstanding person in this world? His character, talent, strength, and luck have all reached the highest level. But such an outstanding person is my disciple, Shentian Senzun. Although he should be called Divine Venerable Shentian now. But after all, he had been Senzun for so many years. It wasn't easy to change his name in a short time. Shentian Senzun's name was more widely known than the Divine Venerable's name. Many powerful people still remembered him, especially the group of old monsters in the middle of the chaos. Presumably, he wouldn't forget that he was once a brilliant and outstanding person. Back then, he had also roamed the ninefold divine world like Qin Yu. He made countless friends and enemies. And after these 10,000 years, it was unknown how much they had grown. However, when Qin Yu returned, he would have to consider whether or not to change his name. From then on, there was no Shentian Senzun in this world, only Divine Master Shentian. Seems like a Divine Venerable sounds more powerful. Divine Master Shentian decided to change his name. In any case, his strength had already increased. To change or not to change? In the eyes of others, he had the strength of an ultimate god. The most chaotic place in Flame World was a group of volcanoes. There were countless volcanoes there, and if one broke through the ground, they would see boiling lava. This was not the special place where Shenron lived. Although there was magma there, it could also be said to be a picturesque scenery. And here, it was boiling hot. Everyone who came in felt as if they were placed in a steamer. It was as if it would be cooked in the next moment. But there were still many experts who chose this place as the place to fight. Although there was an endless amount of boiling magma here. But there was also vast power in the lava. The surroundings were desolate. Even if they fought, no one would be hurt. Thus, this place became the most suitable location for the competition. And one of the people who had the earth fruit escaped here. Originally, he wanted to use the harsh environment here to hide temporarily. He had a secret method that allowed him to temporarily hide in the lava. This way, no one would be able to find him. But there were still more experts than he had imagined. There were countless people who chased after him. Among them, there were many who were strong or had the same ability as him. Soon, the person who held the earth fruit died. He had died under the siege of countless people, losing his footing and falling into the lava. He died before he could even put up a struggle. Although there was some lingering fear, everyone's desire for the earth fruit surpassed everything. It was normal for people to die. In fact, all the survivors wished that everyone else would die. That would be the best. Only when everyone died would they be able to obtain the final victory. The fewer opponents there were, the more likely they were to get the earth fruit. That was supreme power. Who didn't want to get it? Everyone wanted to get that huge power to strengthen themselves. There was already a true God in this world. But who knew if they would become the only two true gods after getting this fruit? With this thought, countless people began to fight over it. For a fruit, they almost broke their heads and even shed all pretenses of cordiality. Former friends could turn against each other and become enemies. These old monsters who had long been indifferent to kinship were even more willing to pay any price. They could even sacrifice their own disciples and grand disciples without hesitation. And those who claimed to be righteous also shamelessly tried to snatch it. But the current situation didn't allow them to suppress others with their power. Because they were surrounded by experts who were almost as strong. In this chaotic situation, there was suddenly one more person. No one would care. If there was someone here, they would just look at this man who suddenly appeared with vigilance. They wouldn't think about where this person came from. At this time, they were in a killing frenzy. Other than themselves, everyone was an enemy. Looking at this somewhat absurd scene, Qin Yu Jiao felt that it was funny. If they were to find out that all of this was fake, the so-called earth fruit had been taken away long ago. However, these were only the earth calamity fruits. While they had similar effects to the earth tribulation fruit, they also had a chance of failure. Maybe they could be used to improve themselves, but they definitely couldn't increase their chances of breaking through. The difference in effects between the two was like heaven and earth. This was the origin of the names of these two fruits. It was a pity that these people were confused. They even mistook the fake for the real one. Because of this, they were completely shameless. The three famous leaders of Flame World had arrived. Originally, there had been a hidden powerful faction, the Underground City. This was the most powerful faction. But recently, there had been some disturbances in the Underground City. The city master didn't have the mood to fight for it. Right now, he owed Shen Tian Senzun a great favor. At least half of his life belonged to Shen Tian Senzun. Of course, he wouldn't fight for it. His strength had reached a critical point. It didn't matter if he had it or not. Even more, he had experienced being refined into a puppet. The city master also desired strength, but he wasn't stubborn. Chapter 1061. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. The biggest force didn't interfere in this matter. The remaining three experts gathered together. They had been in seclusion for several years. They were the legendary old monsters. On the surface, there were many experts. But only they could be called the real peerless experts. At this moment, they gathered together just to snatch a fruit that was as big as their palm. If they could get it, they might be able to break through to a higher realm. They would completely break the balance and look down on the world. The onlookers didn't have the guts to snatch it directly. But they hoped that the three giants would be able to fight until all three were injured. Then, they would definitely have a chance. Although the possibility was very low. Everyone hoped that they were the lucky ones who stepped on dog shit. A person came with a saber. The murderous aura on his body was extremely domineering. Wherever he passed, Everyone was pushed to the side by a powerful force. Everyone was no exception. From the perspective of the three giants, it was as if the crowd had automatically opened a path for this person. How about letting me join in? Fight with me. If I win, you don't want the spirit fruit. If one of you wins, the fruit will belong to him. The three giants looked at each other warily. They knew each other too well. They even knew what each other's trump cards were. If they really fought under such circumstances, no one could really gain the upper hand. It was even possible that the weak people standing next to them would take advantage of them for no reason. This was definitely a situation that no one wanted to see. But now, a stranger suddenly appeared. Just like the conditions that Qin Yu said, they were already very good for them. Qin Yu suddenly said such words at this time, which just happened to give them a choice. And Qin Yu didn't want the extremely precious spirit fruit in their eyes. Then this deal wasn't impossible. If Qin Yu went back on his word, the three of them would naturally join hands. No matter what kind of background Qin Yu had, the three of them were old monsters who hadn't been born for countless years. With the trump cards in their hands, could it be that they couldn't protect a fruit? After hesitating for a moment, everyone nodded in agreement. He didn't know what Qin Yu's purpose was. However, it wasn't as if they hadn't heard of it before. Some people just like to look for opponents everywhere. Clearly, no one was stronger than them now. The intense battle intent on Qin Yu's body caused them to be even more certain of their guess. For such people, just one battle with them was enough. It didn't matter whether he won or lost. Qin Yu finally showed a slight smile. It was indeed as they had guessed. It didn't matter whether he won or lost. The most important thing was whether anyone was willing to fight with him. This time, he was only here to temper himself, and the results were not important. As long as he could make a breakthrough and accumulate combat experience, that would be enough. These people's thoughts were not within his consideration. Come on then. The dominating heaven blade fell into his hands and unleashed its full power. The domineering power made people not dare to look directly at it. Those who were weaker to begin with retreated even further away. Only then did he dare to watch this battle directly. When the three giants felt the strong suppression, they couldn't help but show a look of horror. Even they had to treat this opponent who suddenly appeared with caution. Of course, only Qin Yu with such strength was qualified to be the judge who could get the spirit fruit. As long as they could defeat Qin Yu first, they would be able to get the final victory. However, things would really go as they wished. They would successfully defeat Qin Yu. The three of them had the same thought. They thought that it was only a matter of time. The only difference was who would be defeated first. Who would get the final victory. However, they didn't think about whether they would be defeated one day. Golden scales like the sea. Mayfly startles the sky. Change to the east amnesty. The three of them attacked at the same time. Their power was monstrous. Qin Yu stood under the attacks from three sides. His expression didn't change. The dominating heaven blade in his hand was slightly raised. There were no fancy moves. He blocked the three forces one after another. It looked very easy. Then, he pushed forward slightly. The combined strength of the three people couldn't do anything to Qin Yu. At this moment, the three giants vaguely felt that something was wrong. With their reputations, if they were defeated by a nameless person, they would definitely be defeated. One could imagine how big a blow it would be to them. They attacked again. This time, they didn't care about face. They took out their trump cards in one breath. They just wanted to win. Their real goal was to be able to hold the heavenly tribulation fruit in their hands. They could truly see through the secrets of heaven and step into the realm of a true God. They could be respectfully called Divine Lord by everyone, and this plan couldn't be disrupted by anyone. The three of them were extraordinarily powerful when they worked together. Although each of them was wary of the other. They dared to use any despicable moves. They increased the strength of the same move and brought out their highest strength. They threw some hidden weapons in the dark, wanting to succeed in a sneak attack. As long as the sneak attack succeeded, the final balance of victory would be tilted to them. The dragon soul that hadn't appeared for a long time. It blocked all the attacks in the dark as soon as it attacked. As for those attacks that appeared to be on the surface, they were all directly blocked by Qin Yu. Under such strong pressure, he was still able to stand steadily. All the bones in his body made a crisp sound because of the great pressure. However, he wasn't angry. Instead, he was happy. What he wanted was such a strong pressure. Otherwise, how could he be promoted? Ordinary opponents were no longer in his eyes. Only this kind of pressure could make him feel so carefree and unrestrained. Your strength is not bad, but it's a pity that you're not an honorable person. Even though Qin Yu was under enormous pressure, he still had a relaxed expression on his face. He even spoke with confidence. The three of them felt fear in their hearts at the same time. However, they didn't know where this fear came from. It's time to end it. Annihilation, divine thunder. The huge destructive aura merged with the domineering and fierce intent of the dominating heaven blade. It came with an irresistible deterrence. The three giants were sent flying one after another, smashing into a deep pit. Their internal organs were shaken. They spat out a mouthful of blood and could no longer stand up. They often had to recuperate, and they didn't know how long it would take. Originally, they were a group of old fellows resting, and it wouldn't be easier for them to recover than ordinary people. Suddenly, they were seriously injured at this juncture. Obviously, the heavenly tribulation fruit was definitely not fated with them. For a moment, they hated Qin Yu. At the same time, they were shocked by how he had such powerful strength. Even the few of them together couldn't pose a threat to him. Which corner of the world did this peerless monster pop out from? Chapter 1062. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. While the three of them were extremely weak, the rascals around them could not help but feel agitated. Qin Yu had said that he did not want the spirit fruit. Did that mean that they could get a share of the loot after the expert was seriously injured? When the three magnates saw that the situation was not good, they did not care about the hatred of being seriously injured. They politely asked Qin Yu who he was from. Such a demon-level genius, they absolutely do not believe that Qin Yu himself is a maverick. However, they had never heard of him before. Such a powerful and peerless expert had appeared. They quickly compared the person in front of them with each other. However, none of the peerless experts they knew matched the young man in front of them. It was troublesome to not be able to find him. Which sect is he from? The only personal disciple of ultimate god Shen Tian. Ultimate god? There was only one ultimate god who had recently broken through. It was also that ultimate god. Countless of them had been paying attention to him. However, the name Shen Tian sounded familiar to the old monsters. It seemed that there was such a person 10,000 years ago who was extremely powerful. However, that person had disappeared for many years. As far as they knew, the person with the name Shen Tian had disappeared many years ago. Those were those who were slightly weaker, and they didn't even remember such a person. Only the three magnates knew about him. Only then did they know how powerful and terrifying the person with the name Shen Tian was. If that person had taught him to be so terrifying. Moreover, he was a talented disciple. It seemed to be an extremely normal thing. There were many guesses in front of them. How powerful must the person be to be accepted as his personal disciple? This was because the young and energetic profound Heaven Celestial Venerable had once said these words in an extremely heroic manner. If one did not surpass him in terms of talent, he was not qualified to be accepted as his personal disciple. However, his own strength was already the best in the world. In the ninefold divine realm, no one's strength had improved faster than his. How difficult would it be to be faster than him? No matter how good a person was at bragging. They did not dare to be thick-skinned and say that their descendants were more powerful than Shen Tian. Is the person you're talking about related to the immortal realm? Are you from the Profound Heaven sect? But as far as I know, the Profound Heaven sect is on the decline. That's right. Back then, Shen Tian also left behind some disciples and grand disciples. The three magnates had failed, and they didn't care about this at this moment. If what Qin Yu said was true, then wouldn't they have made a fool of themselves? Qin Yu had a true god as his master. How could he possibly be interested in their little things? Who knew if Divine Master Shen Tian had something better in his hands, let alone a heaven's calamity fruit. After all, that was the legendary true God. Even the spirit fruits that they were constantly fighting over. And it was all thanks to Shentian Senzun that he was able to break through to the true God realm. The three leaders struggled to get up and sat on the ground. It wasn't that he didn't want to stand up and talk to Qinyu with the attitude of an elder. It was just that they had just been seriously injured. At this moment, even if he could barely stand up, it would be obvious that he was exhausted. He could only sit cross-legged on the ground for the time being. At least he seemed to be in a peaceful state. No one could see through their calm exterior. It could be seen how much they had been injured. Even if they were sitting like this, many people would be able to guess it. They were actually seriously injured. However, it was still much better than directly embarrassing themselves in front of everyone. Qinyu flipped his hand, and there were 3 immortal herbs with crystal clear dewdrops in his palm. As long as he took a leaf of this immortal herb, he could immediately heal some non-fatal injuries. It could be said to be a life-saving weapon at a critical moment. However, Qinyu took out such precious things with a flip of his hand. There were 3 of them. It was exactly the same number of people as the 3 leaders. Take the medicine and swallow it. After your injuries have healed, continue to spar with me. At this moment, the 3 leaders had already guessed. As expected, Qinyu came to find them to train himself. However, even if they knew about this matter now, no one would say anything. Logically speaking, even if they were to be seriously injured because of this. However, as long as they sparred a few times, they would have an additional life force that could save their lives at critical moments. This was a very good deal. However, the premise was that it was really a spar. Qinyu could defeat the 3 of them alone. This was only the middle stage of Senzun. As they sparred, their strength would definitely increase. The outcome of the battle was already decided at the beginning. There was no suspense at all. When the time came, it would be Qinyu beating the 3 of them alone. Whether it was for their remaining dignity, or because they could not contribute anything and were embarrassed to accept such a precious thing. The 3 of them rejected at the same time. If he was really Divine Master Shen Tian's personal disciple, Qinyu was also someone they could not offend. At least before they made a clear judgment, they could not act rashly. If Qinyu was not strong enough, perhaps they would have to consider whether they could capture this personal disciple. They could use this to threaten Divine Master Shen Tian to give them a lot of benefits. They could not win even with the 3 of them together. Although they did not die, they were seriously injured at the same time. They lost with no dignity left. It's the 3 of us who are too ashamed to see others. You can take the heavenly calamity fruit. After thinking about it, it was not good to give it to anyone. None of them won. Although Qinyu said he did not want it in the beginning. However, no matter who got the fruit, they were not willing to accept it. If they divided it and ate it, they did not know if it would be effective. Such a good thing would be wasted in vain. Because of this consideration, no one was willing to let others take advantage of it. It was a relatively fair choice to let it fall into Qinyu's hands. When the time came, none of them would be able to get it. It was also a good opportunity to sell it. Why wouldn't he do it? It was a pity that these people were still kept in the dark. Until now, they had not been able to distinguish the difference between one spiritual fruit and another. Qinyu had long known that the real heavenly calamity fruit was in his hands. The fruit that was being fought over was only the earth calamity fruit. Although there was only one word difference in the name, the effect was completely different. The difference in their value was like the difference between heaven and earth. Only those who had not seen it with their own eyes would confuse the two. If they had really seen it with their own eyes, they would be able to distinguish the subtle difference. Although it was subtle, the feeling that the two gave was completely different. You should first figure out what you are fighting for. Before leaving, Qinyu left a sentence that made the 3 giants a little confused. They did not know what the meaning of this sentence was. Perhaps they had guessed it, but they did not dare to believe it. Chapter 1063. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. If what they were fighting for wasn't the real heavenly tribulation fruit, then everything they'd done before would be a joke. Moreover, they'd suffered heavy injuries because of it, so they'd shed all pretense of cordiality. There were many people like them. Almost all the old monsters in the god realm had made a move. The remaining one or two who hadn't made a move yet were just watching. Obviously, they'd all make a move soon. No expert could remain calm in the face of the 3 words, heavenly tribulation fruit. Even if they could remain calm for a while, they'd definitely go crazy for the heavenly tribulation fruit. They were just the first to make a move, so they'd gotten a chance. But even they'd become a joke. What about the others? If all this was just a scam, they didn't dare to imagine how messy things would become. It's just as you think. Next time, please use your brain and think carefully before you do anything. How could a real treasure bear more than a dozen fruits at once? Although it's a treasure, it's very different from what you're expecting. The 3 leaders thought about it and found it reasonable. However, they didn't dare to imagine the consequences of their misjudgment. Fortunately, they weren't the only ones who'd misjudged. Almost everyone else had misjudged. At least before Qin Yu's appearance, no one had thought about the fruit they'd been trying to find. Was it what they'd been trying to find? It wasn't that no one had doubted it before. But after all, there was no problem with the origin of the item. It was just that people had mistaken it at the beginning. Coupled with the heavenly tribulation fruit and earthly tribulation fruit, they did look similar at first glance. Thus, he managed to deceive everyone. If no one tried to use it, they wouldn't feel any obvious difference. At least for those who hadn't seen the real difference between the two. It was very difficult to tell the difference between the two. This made the 3 leaders unable to sit still. Even if they were seriously injured, they had to spread the news. It would be great if they could use this news to bring them some benefits again. After all, including them, there were still many people who were kept in the dark. Now they knew the truth of the matter. It didn't mean that other people knew. Of course, they had doubts about Qin Yu's words. After Qin Yu left, they checked again. They found that there were indeed many things that were wrong. They had to admit that perhaps they'd really made a mistake. What would happen after this? How much would it cause? How many people would it cause? How many people? It wouldn't have much to do with Qin Yu. This victory, he had gained a lot of combat experience. And he had a deeper understanding of his strength. His strength was already considered to be one of the best among some experts. At the very least, he would not be at a disadvantage when facing ultimate god Shen Tian. The others were no match for him. As long as it wasn't all the experts in the world, they would all rush up together. To him was B. To Lin then, at he at least then. He with translation, his being translation with his translation, his translation. Qin, translation on slight translation on lot that in sin in translation that he would s he. Here, there. Shun there was here translation that day of that s. That. He didn't expect this day to come so soon. Things had been rather chaotic recently, and even he had gotten into some trouble. He didn't have much desire for the calamity fruit, but the hierarch did. Moreover, many people had their eyes on this place. The 9 venerables all had their eyes on the treasure. Kaiki Shenron also had a headache about this matter. Even though he was very powerful, he couldn't completely control this chaotic situation. Qin Yu's sudden appearance had aroused his vigilance. However, he didn't have too much energy to think about it until he saw Qin Yu's aura with his own eyes. It was very different from before. That was why he was shocked. It was impossible for Shenron to improve so quickly. Shenron had an absolute advantage since birth. If one really wanted to calculate the speed of breakthrough, it couldn't even be compared with the current Qin Yu. How can your breakthrough speed be so fast? Yes, you're a very talented person. At this moment, his mood was quite complicated. Although he was still vigilant, after all, Qin Yu had reached a level where he could stand shoulder to shoulder with him. Previously, he was more skeptical. Why was Qin Yu at a level that even Senzun couldn't reach? He was able to make Shenron submit to him. Therefore, he had been vigilant since long ago and wanted to get rid of him as soon as possible. He didn't want to be implicated. Moreover, after getting rid of Qin Yu, the other Shenron would also have to owe him a favor. After all, he was the one who helped them out. Now it seemed that he was in the wrong. There were really monstrous geniuses in this world. There were even geniuses that he couldn't compare to, even if he was born with a great advantage in Shenron. Sometimes, he couldn't completely have this advantage. Most of the time, he had to admit that he couldn't compare to those true geniuses in some aspects. You're wrong. The so-called geniuses also have the word pride in them, and I'm not those geniuses. There will be a day when the geniuses fall forever. Everything I have now is based on my own strength, step by step. If there's anything different about me from others, perhaps it's because of this. Kaiki Shenron fell into silence. He had always wanted to improve, and in order to improve, he had paid a big price. What he was doing now was also to comprehend. In order to have a deeper understanding of the world. He wanted to control the power of time and space, but he had failed repeatedly. Now it seemed that perhaps he had asked for too much. That was why he couldn't achieve his goal. He had asked for so much, but he couldn't do so much. In addition, these things had taken up a lot of his attention. It made his goal no longer pure, and he couldn't find his original heart. This was the reason why he had failed again and again. Even if your strength improves, I won't easily bow my head. Just do as you said at the beginning. Defeat me and make me bow my head willingly. Kaiki Shenron was ready. The result of this battle wasn't important at all. It was just to fulfill the previous agreement. The current Qin Yu already possessed a strength that could make him willingly lower his head. If Qin Yu could really defeat him. So what if he had to work like an ox or a horse for Qin Yu? It would only be 10,000 years. Chapter 1064. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. The final result was no surprise. Kaiki Shenron was defeated. Kaiki Shenron had experienced it himself. He could not refuse at all. Now that he had completely lost, he had no choice but to admit defeat. He could no longer refuse any of Qin Yu's requests. For the loser. As the winner, Qin Yu had the absolute right to deal with it. Even if he wanted to kill his defeated opponent on the spot, no one would say anything. Although Shenron would not really die. It would take countless years for him to come back to life again. And he would have to grow from scratch. He would have to pay a great price. Therefore, death was not completely without a price for Shenron. Not to mention that Qin Yu only wanted a drop of essence blood. It did not matter even if he wanted more. But in the end, Qin Yu only took what he wanted. Even if he wanted more blood essence, it wouldn't be any better for him. Kaiki Shenron was truly willing to bow his head this time. Qin Yu was now extremely powerful. The Qin Yu he saw in the beginning was extremely different. He couldn't even utter a single word of objection. He could only bow his head and wait quietly for his fate. If you don't want to follow me, you can continue to guard here. But if someone fights here, remember to control the situation. Don't let them make a big deal out of it. If there is some news about Divine Master Shentian, you can deal with it as you see fit. Speaking of Divine Master Shentian, Kaiki Shenron had to be vigilant against the expert who suddenly broke through to the true God realm. He was also extremely vigilant. Although he did not understand why, he was not ashamed to ask. To him, to be able to continue to live in this land where he had always lived. There was no better news than this. He also felt grateful to Qin Yu. As long as he gave him a drop of essence blood. For Shenron, this would cause him to be weak for 100 years. But as long as he was protected by treasures of heaven and earth, this time would slowly shorten. For him, it was not a great loss. 100 years would pass in the blink of an eye for Shenron. He did not care much about this time. It was because of this gratitude in his heart that he wanted to do more. He wanted to contribute as much as possible so that Qin Yu would not completely forget about him. When he remembered that he was not doing his job as a servant, then, he would not have a good time. Divine Master Shentian is my master. You just don't mind it. Don't take it too much. I think there are not many people in this world who dare to talk about the Divine Master. Kaiki Shenron was shocked. But when he thought of Qin Yu's ins and his strength, in the end, he Shenron's thought translation. For such a powerful person, if he had a master, he would be just as powerful. Thinking about it, it seemed to be a matter of course. Translation his master translation that translation Take note translation. Suddenly, the towering wood divine dragon recalled something that happened some time ago. In his opinion, this matter wasn't that big of a deal. But it was related to divine master Shen-Tian. Someone mentioned Senzun Shen-Tian. There was only one word difference. It would be fine if it was just a coincidence. But if it was really the same person, then he had to be vigilant. Although there were quite a few people in this world with the title of Shen-Tian, there were still many people in this world. After all, the world was big. It was normal to have the same name occasionally. But when Kaiki Shenron described the appearance of those people, Qin Yu knew that it was definitely not a coincidence. Speaking of which, this person was an old acquaintance of his. He did not expect to meet him here. Maybe it was a coincidence, or maybe it was fate that could not be understood. This is really a coincidence. But you just need to be a little more careful. That person is an old acquaintance. Kaiki Shenron knew that something was not right when he heard that. Although it sounded like an old acquaintance, Qin Yu was not excited to see an old acquaintance at all. It was just that Qin Yu's strength had increased a lot. Therefore, what happened back then was still in his memory. And it was very deep. But with his current realm, he did not think highly of his former opponent. Therefore, he only asked people to be a little more careful. This was to prevent anything unexpected from happening. But this guy did not learn his lesson at all. He came to the ninefold divine realm and dared to have designs on the master and disciple pair. If that was the case, he had to teach him a lesson. But before the other party took the initiative to attack, with his current strength, there was really no need to find that person back then. Kaiki Shenron took note of that. After that, Qin Yu left without hesitation. He had achieved his purpose of coming here. He put away Shenron's blood essence for the time being. With his current strength, he could be said to be invincible. If he increased his strength again, he would not be able to find an opponent. Other than his master, perhaps no one in this world was qualified to be his opponent. Wouldn't it be too bleak then? It was better to continue looking for an opponent to train himself. When the time came, a breakthrough would be just a matter of time. Although the blood essence could rapidly increase his strength, it could also greatly improve him. But these improvements were brought by external things. Tempering himself was the most important thing for him. Xuelan, of course, supported Qin Yu unconditionally. With her current strength, it was somewhat impossible for her to catch up to Qin Yu. But if Qin Yu chose to train himself temporarily, it would give her a chance to catch up. The Wood Realm was still rather peaceful. Some of Shenron's movements were particularly noticeable. However, no one could guess what had happened. Only the hierarch might have some vague guesses. But he could not be sure. After all, it was just a guess. According to the current situation, it seemed a little too absurd. How could someone have such great strength? To be able to fulfill his promise in such a short time. Although he also knew that it was not completely impossible. But after all, in their minds, Shenron's strength was extremely high. It was so high that no one could surpass it. In their opinion, Shenron with such great strength was basically impossible to be defeated by others. Although they were respectful to Qin Yu, it did not mean that with Shenron's self-esteem, he would be open to others. These people would always be his subordinates. They were also pawns that he could use at will. These pawns were not qualified to think about what he had experienced. And they were not qualified to think about anything here. They just needed to follow his orders. Chapter 1065. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. He got an extremely powerful Shenmuism for free. However, Qin Yu did not mention this matter from the beginning to the end. It was not that he really ignored this matter. There was no need for that. Now that he had returned, he had achieved his goal. These people's matters had little to do with him. Even if Kaiki Shenron took this opportunity to express his loyalty, it did not matter to him. The most chaotic place now was the Wind Realm. This was because this was the place where the calamity happened. When Divine Master Shen Tian was undergoing the calamity here, no one dared to come and watch. After that, that piece of land had become a sacred place that everyone yearned for. After being nourished by divine power, that piece of land was quietly changing. Countless treasures of heaven and earth were growing on it. Countless mutated and powerful treasures were growing on that piece of land one after another. Moreover, because the quality of that piece of land had changed, even some plants that were difficult to grow could grow rapidly on it. Moreover, it was well nourished. As a result, everyone was arguing about the ownership of that piece of land. Moreover, there were some records of such a situation. It seemed that the divine power of the calamity had brought about changes to this piece of land. This change was not permanent. Therefore, within a short period of time, who could have the right to use this piece of land? It became a matter of great dispute. The second largest family wanted this piece of land the most. With this piece of land as the backing for their descendants, they could let the new generation grow quickly. Some of the talented disciples could also quickly rise. By then, they might be able to get rid of their reputation as the second largest family. As for the first-ranked Situ family, there was no doubt that they had become the target of public criticism. Situ Hua wanted to guard this piece of land by himself. Obviously, it was not possible. The Situ family had been able to hold on until now. They had relied on the accumulation of generations of ancestors. However, they had experienced an unforeseen event. The current family head was just a young boy. His strength was not very high. Wouldn't such a person become a live target in the chaos? Moreover, with the Situ family's foundation, no matter how they declined, their collection was also very impressive. After all, it was the accumulation of generations. However, such a treasure was guarded by Situ Hua. In the eyes of outsiders, it was no different from a 3-year-old child guarding a huge treasure. They could snatch a part of it with a move of their fingers. If they were more domineering, they could even take all of it for themselves. This kind of wordless speculation made many people restless. Even the second-ranked family was the most moved. However, they still had some face and did not directly snatch it. Situ Hua at that time. Previously, he had listened to Qin Yu and with the help of a new batch. The speed of these people's improvement was very fast, which gave the entire Situ clan some confidence. Even if these people for the time being. However, as long as they continued to invest resources in it, even if it was pulling up the seedlings to help them grow, could get them translation could. At such a critical time. It was enough for him to temporarily increase his prestige, or at least show it in front of everyone. Was translation to translation was to like was like compared to ordinary people. Situ Hua knew more about the person who was going through the tribulation. Perhaps he was the only one who knew this secret very well. He did not tell anyone. Situ Hua's heart was surging. Even if it was just a little help, then he would be able to completely stabilize his position. After all, that was the legendary Divine Master. Although everyone wanted to directly shed all pretense of cordiality and fight for the right to use that piece of land. However, no one dared to really provoke a Divine Master. If Divine Master Shen Tian reappeared on the land where he once stood, absolutely no one dared to have any thoughts. At that time, it would be good if they did not curry favor with him. After all, that was a Divine Master. Even if there were many Senzun together, they would not be able to defeat him. Everyone had no choice but to treat him nicely. No matter how many thoughts they had in their hearts, they could not show them at all. Situ Hua held it in his hand. It was after Divine Master Shen Tian broke through. He suddenly thought of him, so he left one for him. It was a communication talisman that could be used to contact him. Although he had not experienced enough danger to destroy his family yet, Situ Hua was also an extremely decisive person. He knew that with the strength of this batch of new students under him, it was impossible for him to truly protect his family, and it was also impossible for him to truly protect everything that belonged to him. If there was no absolute expert to hold the fort, at that time, everything in his hands would be taken away. No one knew how many traitors there were in the Situ family. However, after what happened before, he absolutely did not dare to have any good feelings for these blood relatives. He did not dare to have too much trust. After all, people were fickle. He had already seen it with his own eyes. Suddenly, an empty image appeared in front of Qin Yu's eyes. Situ Hua could not see the person on the other side, but who was it that had been speaking his mind? He wanted to make a new deal, as long as there was an expert to help him guard it. At that time, he could pay a lot of prices. He would not hesitate to bring the entire Situ family to rely on Divine Master Shen Tian. Of course, he also knew that although the Situ family was the #1 family, however, for an ultimate god, it was still somewhat dispensable. He only relied on the fact that he knew him and had met him a few times. He only dared to speak because they had a little friendship. Whether it would work or not, he had already said it anyway. If there was even a slight chance of success, he would definitely be able to sit firmly in this position. At that time, the Situ family would be able to slowly develop under his command. It seems that I still have to change the itinerary. Of course, he would not lose out. Not to mention how valuable the loyalty of the entire Situ family was. There were many opponents there, which just happened to meet his current conditions. This was already a deal that was sure to be profitable and not a loss. Although he wanted to go directly to the Earthrealm just now to find the new Shenron, it did not matter even if he went to other places midway. Situ Hua was indeed a good person. Since Divine Master Shen Tian had left him a way to contact him, that was to give him a chance to make a request. Moreover, this request was considered equal. It was beneficial to him and not harmful at all. Situ Hua waited for a long time, but no one came. Once again, someone came to look for trouble. Although these people stared at the gifts with big and small bags. In fact, they were here to test the ability of the Situ family to survive. Then, they would see where to start. Chapter 1066. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. He sneered in his heart, but he did not show it on his face. At least on the surface, Situ Hua was very considerate in his etiquette. No one could find fault with him. However, they could understand his vigilance. Most people were wary of the Situ family. Even the Qi family, which was ranked second, did not dare to make a move easily. They were afraid that they would bring trouble to themselves. However, the Jiang family, which was ranked third, did not have so many scruples. They were only ranked third. They had just climbed up in recent years. Naturally, they did not have any worries. They only hoped that they could get more. The Qi family did not dare to make a move. In their eyes, they were cowards. They did not have so many scruples. They would get whatever they could. With the Situ clan's current state, could they really do anything to them? They would be lucky if they could not even protect themselves. Even if they failed, they did not think that they would lose much. After weighing the pros and cons, they naturally visited again and again. Situ Hua had been impatient for a long time, but he could not chase them away. This was because once they made a move, they might expose the fact that there were not many experts left in the family. After all, the elders had died in Qin Yu's hands. However, he could not laugh very soon. This was because the Jiang family had brought an expert who was above Senzun's level this time. It was obvious that they did not come with good intentions. Situ Hua's face darkened. He directly asked him what he meant by this. It was extremely rude to bring an expert to their house without permission. If they brought an expert to their house without permission, it would be considered as a provocation. It would be seen as a provocation. Jiang Wenchang had a smile on his face and seemed to be very happy. However, he was not polite with his words. This person is an honorary elder of my family. He has always wanted to see the power of the Situ family, the #1 family. I couldn't persuade him, so I brought him here to broaden his horizons. There shouldn't be a problem. Although he said so, he occasionally sized up that person and saw his murderous look. He knew that it was not that simple. However, Situ Hua couldn't say anything about it. If his reaction was too big, he would be suspected. Even though there weren't many experts left in the clan, Only a few old seniors who didn't fight or snatch could be considered to have some strength. However, this person's aura was very strong. It seemed like he was at the peak of his strength. If he were to compete with those old fellows, it would be hard to say who would win and who would lose. After all, his stamina was there for all to see. Sometimes, strength wasn't just one of the factors. If you wanted to win, you needed to have abundant stamina and rich experience. Even external objects. The man was holding a pair of spiked maces that looked like they had been soaked in blood for years. Based on this point, the older seniors all felt that something was amiss. Therefore, it was somewhat inappropriate for him to step forward and fight with this person. Sichu Hua was worried about what to do about this. Suddenly, a door appeared in the courtyard. Qin Yu stepped out with Xuelan and appeared in front of everyone. Because many people who had been here before knew him. Even those who didn't know him could feel the aura of an expert from his body. Therefore, he did not dare to act rashly. Although Qin Yu didn't have a boiling murderous aura, everyone saw his eyes. They couldn't help but feel a little scared. Their first reaction was to find a place to hide. When Jiang Wenchang saw Qin Yu, who had suddenly appeared, his thoughts became active. With his strength, he couldn't see through Qin Yu's true background. However, the person beside him quickly told him what he felt. This made him a little more vigilant. With such a dignified appearance, he definitely wasn't some old monster who hadn't appeared in the world. However, he had such a terrifying cultivation realm. Could this be the trump card that Sichu Hua hadn't taken out all this time? As expected, the number one family still had some strength. However, he was alone. Who knew how much strength he had? Before the final moment arrived, he still couldn't let go of the countless wealth and benefits that seemed to be right in front of him. Sichu Hua immediately went up to greet him warmly. His attitude was completely different from when he met the Jiang family. It was like heaven and earth. This made Jiang Wenchang extremely uncomfortable. This difference in attitude was a little too obvious. Even if this wasn't his original purpose, he couldn't help but feel a little uncomfortable in his heart. If he had known that this would be the result, he wouldn't have been so polite just now. He didn't give him any face at all. Sichu Hua. Jiang Wenchang was in an extremely bad mood at this moment. Even if he knew that Qin Yu wasn't someone he could easily offend. This time, it was best to put on a show on the surface. However, he had always been arrogant, not to mention that he was from a new family. He also had his own young master's temper. However, his slightly arrogant expression fell into Qin Yu's eyes. Another young master who didn't forget about the world. He had some guesses as to how this young master's temper had survived to this day. Perhaps it was because he had been protected too well since he was young, so he was still a little naive. There were plenty of experts out there, and he actually relied on his arrogance to offend people everywhere he went. He wasn't afraid that one day he would end up in an extremely miserable state. However, he didn't know him and couldn't be bothered to remind him. Whether he lived or died had nothing to do with him. I didn't expect to see you so soon. Brother Qin, your strength. Sichu Hua couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air when he took a closer look. Originally, he thought that his speed of improvement was fast enough. Because he was already preparing to break through to the Holy King realm. Although part of the reason was because of the elixir. However, he also had his own efforts. Originally, he was only a middle-stage immortal lord. To be able to break through to the Holy King realm in a short period of time, he was also a proud son of heaven. However, every time he met Qin Yu again, he could feel that Qin Yu's strength had definitely increased by more than one realm. This made him extremely terrified. He also had a feeling that no matter how hard he worked, he would definitely not be able to compare to Qin Yu. He also knew that this was not an illusion. However, he was still somewhat envious. He had a divine master as his master. He was extremely talented and hardworking. Moreover, there was no pressure or responsibility on him. Everything that countless people envied the most was easily available to Qin Yu. However, Sichu Hua couldn't even be envious. He could only take this as an example to remind himself that there was always someone better in this world. Anyone who started from nothing was worthy of respect. Every genius needed to be treated with caution. He was already prepared to treat this as an ancestral teaching. It would be passed down from generation to generation and everyone would abide by it. It was always right to be cautious. Chapter 1067. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor, Endless Fantasy Translation. Jiang Wenchang watched the two of them chatting enthusiastically. Yet, he had been thrown to the side by himself. His mood was getting worse and worse. He slammed the table. A long crack appeared on the table made of high-quality materials, spreading to the corner of the table. It made cracking sounds as if it couldn't bear the burden. Then, Jiang Wenchang grabbed the table with one hand and threw it out. His target was the Qin Yu, who had never moved or shown that he was the other one. Although he seemed to be extremely angry this time, it was specially used to test Qin Yu's true strength. Although the realm was there, he still had some guesses. If Qin Yu's strength wasn't too high, then he had the capital to continue the negotiation. He was also confident that he could make Situ Hua choose to compromise in the end. If Qin Yu's strength was very high, then he would have to think carefully. Facing the table that suddenly flew over, Situ Hua's expression changed drastically. Without even thinking, he immediately retreated. Because he knew that Qin Yu's strength was much higher than his. So many of him added together couldn't compare to Qin Yu's finger. Even if he had the courage to be a human cushion, he could even risk his life. However, to Qin Yu and the others, he was definitely a hindrance. It was precisely because of this self-awareness that he had. Situ Hua dodged quickly without hesitation. The table flew in front of him, and the strong wind left a mark on his face. Blood flowed out of the thin and long wound. But when the table was a foot away from Qin Yu, it suddenly stopped. Then, he stopped abruptly without any warning. This was just the beginning. Under Jiang Wenchang's vigilant gaze, the table began to tremble slowly from the beginning. In the end, it turned into countless fine dust that didn't even fall to the ground. It turned into extremely light dust and dissipated between heaven and earth. Not even a trace of residue was left. If he wasn't extremely powerful, at least a part of the fine dust should be left. Jiang Wenchang knew that his strength was definitely no match for Qin Yu. But he didn't expect to lose so badly. With his current strength, he could at most barely dodge at such a critical moment. And if he wanted to do Qin Yu's level, it was absolutely impossible. If he were Qin Yu, he reckoned that even if he were to use all of his strength, he would only be able to stop the table. Then it would be torn apart and completely broken into pieces. Even the strong Senzun who was following him could only turn these tables into large particles of powder and fall to the ground. But he couldn't let a good table. One must know that these were all good materials, and the materials were extremely tough. Destroying them was also very. In the eyes of that expert, achieving such a feat was no different from a legend. He had the intention to retreat. If it wasn't for the fact that he was paid to solve the problem, and if it wasn't for the fact that he had received a lot of benefits, he would have died. Moreover, he was also concerned about his own reputation. He wanted to escape without hesitation. If he really encountered any trouble, he wouldn't be able to push it away. The Jiang family didn't tell him that there was such a terrifying person in the Situ family. If the Jiang family hadn't told him that as long as he could successfully complete it, when the time came, he would definitely be given 30% of the things he obtained. He wouldn't come. This was the trouble. Jiang Wenchang clenched his teeth tightly and pulled the so-called honorary elder. Of course, these were all done secretly. No one dared to show it on the surface. Whether it was for his reputation or to not be inferior to others. Even if he was extremely shocked, he couldn't show timidity and fear. Situ Hua almost looked up to the sky and laughed. In comparison, Qin Yu and Xuelan seemed to be too calm. It was as if these were just sparse and ordinary things, and not so shocking. You asked me to come here for such a person? Qin Yu's words brought Situ Hua back to his senses and reminded him of what he had just done. At this moment, he finally understood that he couldn't invite the Divine Lord. Instead, he accidentally let Qin Yu come over. He thought of the deal he had mentioned before and the current predicament of the Situ family. Without hesitation, he ordered the guests to leave. He was chased away from the Situ family just like that. Young Master Jiang and the honorary elder's expressions were ugly. However, they didn't dare to act rashly for a while and planned to leave temporarily. Anyway, they would come again after they found out Qin Yu's identity. It was almost impossible for them to give up. These people are really shameless. They think that they're really powerful just because they climbed to the position of the third family. In fact, many people are watching them make a fool of themselves. Situ Hua was also very disdainful. He didn't care about these people at all. However, at this juncture, he couldn't care so much. He just pulled Qin Yu to a relatively secluded place first. No one would barge in here. Of course, what he said wasn't an extremely secretive matter. Of course, he had to hide it from outsiders, but he didn't need to hide it from his own people. He also needed an expert to come over and stabilize the people's hearts. The one who broke through previously was your father, right? After receiving Qin Yu's affirmation, Situ Hua's heart became more stable. He also had more confidence. With such a person, even if it was just a little bit of help, he was also confident that he would be able to gain a stable foothold. Situ Hua didn't hide anything from Qin Yu. Thus, he told them a secret. At present, that piece of land was not only confirmed to be able to grow many treasures. It was also confirmed that many precious species could grow there. Moreover, some precious seeds could be put in there. It was very likely that they would get mutated fruits. It could mutate in a good way, or it could mutate in a bad way. But no matter what, the chances of success were higher. It was also because of this uniqueness that the few great families were fighting fiercely in private. Whether it was for their own interests or to prevent others from developing. All of them were fighting fiercely. Situ Hua wanted to restore the Situ family to its original glory. It was extremely necessary to fight for the right to use a large piece of land for the family. Moreover, after the passage of time, the power of the land had begun to weaken. Obviously, if this continued for about half a year, the land would be useless. Therefore, they had already agreed that there must be a result within 10 days. Otherwise, no one could bear such a huge loss. It seems that you want me to ensure that the Situ family can obtain the right to use the land. Situ Hua could still see very clearly. His real purpose was not to obtain the right to use the land, but to completely stabilize his position. Chapter 1068. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. After Jiang Wenchang returned, the more he thought about it, the more uncomfortable he felt. After all, in his eyes, Qin Yu was all alone. Tell me, why did you run away with me? We're at the same level, but you embarrassed me. Of course, Jiang Wenchang didn't think about how pathetic he was just now. Instead, he blamed everything on the elder who went out with him. In his opinion, if the elder could be more strong-willed, he wouldn't have run away. The elder couldn't be bothered to talk to a young master who didn't know anything. How could such a thing be done so easily? Not to mention how much the Situ family had, none of them knew anything. Such a powerful powerhouse had suddenly appeared. Who could guarantee that Situ Hua didn't have more trump cards in his hands? If you're not willing to accept this, you can start preparing immediately. Speaking of which, he couldn't take this lying down. After all, ever since he became so powerful, no one dared to show him any attitude anymore. Even those who were more powerful than him had to show him some respect. This was because everyone knew that his combat strength was so powerful that he could even challenge people of a higher level. The Jiang family had paid such a high price to invite him over because they knew about his reputation. Qin Yu didn't need to divine to know that the Jiang family would definitely make a move on him in the future. When he left just now, Jiang Wenchang looked at him with an extremely unfriendly gaze. Obviously, he wouldn't let it go. It was because he could bring in more experts so that he could practice his skills. However, the strength of the people around Jiang Wenchang would be too weak. Of course, there was one more thing he had to do before dealing with this small family. He had to go to the Tribulation Land. That place wasn't very prosperous. However, due to the special circumstances, many people had their eyes on that place. The originally remote place had also changed because of such an unforeseen event. It had become a place of hubbub. Sichu Hua had a lot to say. However, he couldn't say a single word. Facing Qin Yu, whose strength had greatly increased, he couldn't raise his head. He could only try his best to be more respectful. Even if they could still say a few words, their actions were restricted by the rules. She had always been worried about whether she had done something wrong. Or perhaps there was something that could be easily picked out by others. There were many people standing guard around the tribulation ground. As long as he had some thoughts. Those who wanted to get a piece of the pie had all sent their elite disciples to guard this place. Both sides minded their own business, but they were also on guard against each other. The land that had undergone great changes was now faintly milky white. It looked extremely pure. But the moment he set foot on the ground, Qin Yu was suddenly enlightened. Powerful lightning energy gushed out of his body. The aura of destruction radiated in all directions. Powerful lightning energy spread out in all directions. Under the ground, there seemed to be something resonating with the annihilation divine thunder. Countless mutated lands kept trembling. A majestic force broke through the ground. At the same time, the soil nourished by the divine power began to fade. He returned to his usual state as fast as he could. This place had been destroyed to begin with. If there wasn't a trace of residual divine power, it should have been a piece of scorched land. Now, it was returning to the right path. Affected by the tremors, some simple bases that had been built collapsed one after another. No matter which side had sent out their men, when they saw this sudden change of events, they were all shocked. They quickly sent the news back to their families. Some people were a little braver and wanted to go closer to take a look. But the moment they came into contact with the annihilation divine thunder, they were turned into human-shaped charcoal. Such a miserable situation made many people afraid to go closer. After all the people had left, Yi Zichen stood up. Qin Yu, who was still standing in the same place, was still the source of the annihilation divine thunder. Unsurprisingly, he became the target of public criticism. Senzun, another expert who is about to break through to real God. There hasn't been a problem for such a long time. How did he do it? Such a huge power. If I could share some of it, I could also become a top expert in the world. Everyone had different thoughts. The sounds of discussion never stopped. But if some people paid attention, they would realize. Among the people who were discussing, none of them were from the Sichu clan. These people remembered what kind of status Qin Yu had. Moreover, was such an expert someone they could casually talk about? They were afraid that he could kill all of them with just a flick of his finger. Even if he didn't do it himself. If he casually gave an order, it would be enough to make the weak die without a burial place. These discussions were unable to affect Qin Yu in the slightest. The power of the calamity faintly resonated with the Tao of Nirvana that he had always wanted. The remaining power was already extremely huge. But this part of power should have dissipated between heaven and earth within half a year. Even if Divine Master Shen Tian was present. It was impossible to touch the extremely heterogeneous and impure power. Even if the power was indeed huge. But there were no restrictions. Moreover, the uncontrollable power was too dangerous. The stronger the power, the more uncontrollable it was and the more it couldn't be touched. Qin Yu's eyes suddenly turned blood red. An ordinary person's body couldn't withstand such a strong power. But he had previously seized the inheritance of an Asura. And the huge power that the Asura had accumulated for countless generations. Of course, an ordinary person couldn't use this power for himself. But using the power of Asura to forcefully assimilate it. It was hard to say what the final result would be. The energy that was enough to destroy heaven and earth was completely extracted in one day. It was extremely violent. If it wasn't for Qin Yu's battle here and the extremely dangerous feeling that came from it. This huge amount of energy would never stay here so obediently. It was a mass of energy. To be able to grow to such an extent, he also had simple judgment. The bloody aura that filled the sky and the chaotic and noisy energy mass gathered together. The two advanced and retreated, almost not giving in to each other. But everyone could see that the bloody aura was spreading faster and more majestic energy. No matter how arrogant it was. No matter how dangerous it was. After a period of time, it was no longer the powerful power that ignored the rules of heaven and earth in the beginning. Now, it had been weakened. In addition, Qin Yu used a strange existence of heaven and earth, the power of blood Azura. The power of blood Azura was also not bound by the rules of heaven and earth. If they were to really compare, the two huge masses of energy were almost equal. But after all, the heterogeneous energy mass was just a mass of dead things. As they fought each other, they were slowly defeated. The light was so dim that it was almost like a firefly. Chapter 1069. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor, Endless Fantasy Translation 10 Sacred Masters. 8 Heavenly Kings. All the famous experts in the Wind Realm rushed over. What they saw was Qin Yu completely suppressing the mottled ball of light by himself. In terms of hardships, if it were them, no one had the confidence to say that they would be able to take down the mixed light ball. However, they were all very knowledgeable people. After seeing the dark red veined patterns gradually appearing on Qin Yu's body, Red's initial astonishment completely turned into fear. All of this was very similar to the legendary Azura. The appearance of an Azura would often lead to the suffering of countless people. The most important thing was that none of the Asuras were weak. If an Azura with Senzun's strength were to appear in the world, all of them combined might not be able to obtain a true victory. Thinking about it, their faces turned even uglier. Just as the battle between the two forces was about to come to an end, suddenly, a few people appeared out of nowhere. Their strength was not bad. However, they did not distinguish between right and wrong and kept calling him Azura. Their intention was to kill Qin Yu on the spot. The light ball over there finally got this opportunity. It began to grow without hesitation. If it was someone with an unstable mentality, they would definitely not be able to stabilize their mind under the pincer attack of both sides. As long as there was a little weakness, the chaotic light clusters would easily break free from his control. At that time, it would be a huge disaster. How could he let go of something that was already in his hands and let it fly away for no reason? 10 sacred masters and 8 heavenly kings working together at the same time was a strange scene that had never been seen before in the world. And it was just to deal with a person who had just helped them escape a disaster. Sichu Hua's face was slightly pale. He hurriedly wanted to take out a communication talisman that could contact divine venerable Xian Tian. However, the communication talisman could only be used once. If he wanted to use it again, he had to use a special method to restart it. Obviously, he did not know the special method and did not know how to contact divine venerable Xian Tian. Don't do anything. He is the disciple of the divine venerable. In a panic, Sichu Hua could only try to emphasize Qin Yu's identity, hoping that things would not get too bad. Heavenly King Ya Han's heart stirred slightly. Although thousands of thoughts appeared in his mind, he immediately refuted. Nonsense. How can you be certain of the truth based on your words alone? How noble is the supreme divinity? There is only one such person in the world. Why would he accept an Azura as his disciple? You're still young, so you probably don't know what kind of existence an Azura is. That is a monster that has no sense of reason but is extremely powerful. Whenever it appears, it will cause great suffering and suffering. Countless innocent people will die. Heavenly King Da Han immediately took out a magic tool that could detect killing intent. Generally speaking, this type of artifact was used to prove himself. It was also to prove that some people deserved to die, and where did they come from? This time, it was able to play its role. Then he would definitely be able to reap great benefits from this. This Dharma artifact could detect things from afar. They were taking advantage of the fact that Qin Yu was busy at the moment. He immediately took out the items and began to examine them. It was a tool that looked like a ruler. A bright red line of blood began to rise. Halfway up, he crossed the 10,000 word mark. He was still climbing up. Until they reached the highest point. The entire ruler looked blood red. Anyone who saw this blood red pool would be speechless. Heavenly King Da Han was proudly preparing to make a righteous complaint. After all, Qin Yu was busy now, so he would do whatever he said. But who knew that the red line still did not stop after reaching the peak? The thin line of blood was beginning to swell. The entire ruler was on the verge of collapsing. While he was talking about how to suppress Qin Yu in an extremely serious manner, the Dharma artifact in his hand finally could not bear the burden. It completely shattered into countless pieces. It was extremely sharp. It directly embedded itself deeply into his flesh and blood. As the master, Heavenly King Han could not bear the burden. His body was covered in wounds of all sizes. Countless fragments were embedded in his flesh. It was a troublesome thing to pick them out. He had not finished speaking in front of everyone, and he had already revealed such a sorry state. There was no need to mention how angry he was. On the contrary, those who did not have a good relationship with him were happy to watch him make a fool of himself. Heavenly King Han could not bear it any longer and struck out with his palm. Earth Emperor palm. Then, he followed up with another punch. Heaven-splitting collapse. This time, he was extremely angry. He used his absolute strength the moment he went up. He was originally suppressed by Qin Yu again. The mottled ball of light felt two huge forces. It instinctively produced a suction force. This force did not land on Qin Yu. It also did not have any effect on Qin Yu. It merged into the mottled ball of light. It was originally a ball of light where all kinds of forces gathered together. Because of this sudden powerful force, it finally regained some light. But other than that little bit of light, there was no effect at all. Heavenly King Han could not accept such an outcome. In his opinion, everything should have been very easy. But things had completely deviated from his intentions. At this moment, Qin Yu clearly did not have the time to care about him. This attack would most likely land on the ground, and he was well aware of his own strength. No matter what, he would be able to seriously injure someone. After that, he would be able to take the biggest share of the benefits. But all his calculations were completely miscalculated because of such a small unforeseen event. Who knew how many people were watching him make a fool of himself? This increase in strength. It was not completely without any change. It was just that this change was not very obvious in the eyes of outsiders. The ball of light's strength increased. In order to recover this huge force as soon as possible, Qin Yu needed an extra minute to hold it. Even though it was just 1 minute, it was still a huge consumption. Of course, a portion of the power that was completely absorbed by the ball of light would also completely merge into his body. It was used to increase his strength. Although before coming, he had not thought about how high his strength would really be. But plans could not keep up with changes. Since there was such a good opportunity, it was very compatible with him. It was a pity to give up for nothing. Heavenly King Han had failed, but there were still many experts left. They just stood there, ready to attack at any time. But they did not choose to attack immediately. Instead, they chose to watch for a while. In this way, the biggest problem was not how to get rid of the Azura. Instead, it is how to get rid of Qin Yu while avoiding that strange power. Sichu Hua was so anxious that the corners of his mouth began to curl up. But his words carried little weight. After this matter, he knew even more clearly. If he did not have strength, no one would care about his identity. Even if he was already the head of the family, strength was that important. Chapter 1070. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. The halo that had been suppressed to the extreme. Under the strong pressure, it could no longer hold on. However, before it dissipated, it still wanted to counterattack. Even though there was very little power left in its body, as long as it released a part of it, it would definitely cause a great impact. Don't even think about it. Qin Yu didn't use any strength. He already knew what this light ball was going to do next. As for the others, they were still clueless about this danger. Originally, as long as Qin Yu was here to guard it. Even if the light ball wanted to destroy the last bit of its remaining power, it was also completely impossible for him to do so. Because the light ball itself had already been exhausted to the extreme. As long as Qin Yu maintained the current momentum, he could safely eliminate all the hidden dangers. But there was no lack of idiots in this world. Especially those who were extremely stupid and thought that they were very smart. These people would never understand what they were doing wrong. Instead, they would stubbornly do as they pleased. among the 10 great saint masters and 8 great heavenly kings. Although one of them had almost no strength left. Even his willpower had been damaged. However, the rest of the people were all extremely famous seniors. With these people in charge, no matter what family came, as long as they didn't have enough experts, they wouldn't be able to compare to them. Most of these experts had not been recruited by any means. They were also super experts who didn't belong to any family. Of course, they didn't have any scruples. Instead, they had always done things according to their own ideas. The experts joined forces. Chaotic wind rising. Mist butterfly storm. Explosive flame spear. The owners of these attacks thought that they would definitely succeed this time. But they didn't expect that it was precisely because they suddenly attacked. But it gave that force the room to completely erupt. Originally, what he lacked the most now was time and Qi knew to force him into a tight corner. There was no room for him to play at all. These people rashly attacked, but it led to the final tragedy. The power that was being persuaded by Qi knew. After absorbing so much power of the experts, it expanded rapidly. Although it wasn't as powerful as before. But it also carried an extremely powerful destructive power. At this moment, anyone with a brain would be able to see it. There was something wrong with the situation. These attacks were not as effective as they thought they would be. Instead, it caused such a huge explosion of power. However, at such a critical juncture, the 10 great saint venerables and 8 great heavenly kings all left. This power was too strong. If they stayed here and got caught in the crossfire, they would lose half their lives. At that time, if someone took this opportunity to make a move on them, no one could survive. On the other hand, those who had been standing at the periphery and pointing had not left with the intention of watching a good show. This time, he would be completely implicated. However, those experts had no intention of taking them with them. After all, these people were too weak. Furthermore, the current heavenly kings and heavenly sovereigns could not even protect themselves. It might be easy to bring 1 or 2 people along. But how could they bring so many people over? A rough calculation showed that there were at least 1,000 people here. At the very most, there were only 18 of them. How could they possibly take all of them away? Even if it was barely enough, they would have to pay a huge price. And this price was not proportional to the final reward. These people were not strong enough to begin with. Naturally, no one would pay such a huge price for these people who were not strong enough. Among the people present, only the people from the Situ clan did not retreat. Especially Situ Hua, who had been standing on the same spot. Even if the powerful force that was released had already left wounds of all sizes on his body. Those mixed forces were extremely chaotic and powerful. When they were released, they quickly spread out in the shape of countless blades. At this moment, there were already many people who were not strong enough. They were chopped into pieces by the wind blades released by the powerful force. As for these powerful and chaotic energies, when they approached Qin Yu, they all dissipated into nothingness. He had already done his best. If it were not for those sudden attacks, there would not be so much chaos. However, at this juncture, the people around him would more or less be affected. However, this place was originally a desolate and uninhabited place. Later on, the people from the various clans all fought for territory. There were not many innocent people who could stand here now. Even if they were slightly affected, they would not suffer heavy losses. It's just a bunch of dead things without intelligence and thoughts. The surrounding wind was raging, but it was only in this position. It was precisely because of this sudden gust of wind. The light that was already small and dim. This time, it was completely extinguished, like a lamp that had been blown out. Only wisps of green smoke were left to prove that it had once existed. And all of that power had been integrated into Qin Yu's body. This was an extremely risky move. The powerful and sharp power suddenly entered his meridians. It caused an extremely strong destructive force. But this power had not become too arrogant. It remained in his body. The will of the Asura woke up unwillingly. It directly suppressed this expanding power with a powerful force. As the power was extracted bit by bit, the tornado, which had originally seemed to be extremely large, was completely destroyed. This time, there was basically nothing left. Until the last wisp of wind completely disappeared. The crisis just now had all disappeared into nothingness. Although the surrounding sand and stones were flying chaotically, he looked as if he had just experienced a great disaster. But after all, everyone was still safe. Even if there were a few unlucky people who had died. But the damage had been suppressed to an extremely low level. Sichu Hua couldn't help but heave a sigh of relief. His choice to stay seemed to be extremely risky, but it was because of trust that he knew that he had to stay. Although he would take a lot of risks. But if he won the bet in the end, then he could succeed. To Chi knew, it was to express his goodwill and to always stand on his side. Even if Chi knew didn't need it, he still had to show a superficial attitude. Chi knew looked at everything around him. At this moment, there was no special mutated land. Because the reason why the land mutated. It was because that ball of light accidentally revealed a little power just now. With that ball of light, that piece of land could be preserved for nearly half a year. Now that the ball of light was gone, there was naturally no so-called mutated land. This matter is not a big deal. If I can't get it, no one else can either. The Sichu family is still the #1 family. He had basically achieved his goal. Chapter 1071. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation Holy Venerables. Heavenly Kings. None of them left. Moreover, he stood at a distance, observing the power of this area. When they saw the huge tornado, they thought that their guess was right. Everyone on that side would die without a burial place. But soon, the huge tornado began to shrink and weaken. Until the last bit of energy was gone. Only then did they realize that something was wrong. This power came and went a little too quickly, wasn't it? No matter how they thought about it, it was unbelievable. When the Jiang family heard the news, it was too late. The divine land that everyone had their eyes on had turned into a wasteland. Now, it looked like a piece of scorched earth. This should have been the real appearance of that piece of land. However, because of this, all the effort and energy they had put into it had gone down the drain. Even they had only wanted to invest in many precious species, such as Lingji and Lingji. All of their energy had been sucked away. They gradually withered. Some of the more delicate ones could not be saved on the spot. As a result, almost all the families had suffered heavy losses. Those who had directly invested their hard-earned capital in one go were even more heartbroken. Some people had even lost half of their wealth. This time, they had lost everything. However, everyone was more concerned about the identity of the person who could cause such a change. It was Jiang Wenchang from the Jiang family. When he saw the simple portrait, he suddenly realized that he had seen him in the Sichu family before. However, he had no intention of hiding this news. Thinking of the different opinions outside, he directly revealed this news. As for who would see this news and what kind of trouble the Sichu family would face because of this, he could not care less. He couldn't care less. This time, the divine soil was gone. It was impossible for the Jiang family to not get anything. If you ask me, I think we should go according to the previous plan. Now that everyone is not on guard against us, this should be our best opportunity to make a move. Right now, the Sichu family is in the position of the family master because of a young boy. He even made a series of ridiculous actions. They should have been destroyed long ago. We have only sped up the process. Moreover, this will happen sooner or later. We can't let others take advantage of us. All sorts of theories emerged one after another. Most of the people in the Jiang family had such thoughts. Furthermore, he never thought that he had done anything wrong. It was precisely because of this that they quickly made a series of arrangements. Wealth and silk move people's hearts. Many people wanted to seize this opportunity to attack the Sichu family. It was just that many people had evil intentions but no guts. With the Jiang family taking the lead, many people would be able to take advantage of this opportunity to make a move. When the time comes, we'll help them and get a share of the loot. It'll be a good thing for everyone. For a while, many people became honorary elders or nominal elders of the Jiang family. All in all, these people were invited from outside and were not from the Jiang family. But even if they knew this, no one said anything. Because the Jiang family had concealed this matter very well. No matter how arrogant he was, he did not reveal any flaws from the beginning to the end. After all, the current patriarch wasn't a fool. Everything was arranged in an orderly manner, and there were no flaws from the beginning to the end. This was also to make sure that no one was prepared for it. Sichu Hua knew that some people might not be able to hold back and attack him. But he didn't expect all of this to happen so quickly. At that time, he was preparing for the banquet and wanted to properly entertain Qin Yu. He had prepared countless rare delicacies for this. But these things didn't have time to be put to use. The door was suddenly broken open. Logically speaking, it shouldn't be broken open so easily. But this was a banquet after all, and a few people accidentally sneaked in during the bustle. In addition, a few ingrates cooperated from the inside and outside. Soon after, the door was broken open. "I'm sorry to let you see this." Sichu Hua's expression was quite ugly. These people didn't give him any face at all. Even if he was lacking in qualifications now. But after all, he was the person with the highest status in the number one family. Even within the Sichu family, no one dared to go against him. What qualifications did these outsiders have to barge in directly? They didn't even greet him and just barged in like that. Now, Sichu Hua knew that his status wasn't high. The most important thing was that he wasn't strong enough. But even if he wasn't strong enough, not everyone could take advantage of him. Otherwise, where would his family's dignity be? "I need an explanation. Why are you here? Are you going to shed all pretense of cordiality and attack me directly? How come I didn't know that the Jiang family was so sanctimonious and didn't know how to be patient at all?" Jiang Wenchang bore the brunt of it. At this moment, looking at the group of people behind him, his confidence was unprecedentedly high. Moreover, they had already brought so many people and barged in. There were still no more powerful experts to attack. This also proved that their guess was right. Now, there weren't many experts in the Sichu family. Previously, they had experienced such a huge internal strife, and later on, they were tormented for a period of time. Basically, most of the experts had died in the internal strife. How could there be enough experts to resist them? But for Qin Yu, who was still here and hadn't left, Jiang Wenchang was more or less a little vigilant. This person definitely couldn't be underestimated. Jiang Wenchang's eyes turned slightly, and a plan surfaced in his mind. Since he had already instructed him before coming, this person couldn't be easily offended. Then, he would try to recruit him. If the recruitment was successful, he would be a very good helper for them. It didn't matter if the recruitment failed. This time, he had brought so many people. Could it be that there was no chance of victory at all? Your future is limitless, and you will definitely reach great heights in the future. Why do you want to stay with the Sichu family, which is destined to decline? Whatever Sichu Hua offered you, as long as you stand on my side, I will give you double. At this moment, Jiang Wenchang, who felt that the holy spring was in his hands, spoke very confidently. Anyway, when the time came, as long as Qin Yu stood on their side, their chances of victory were too high. The entire Sichu family had collected so much wealth. Was there no way to pay these things? Previously, he had used this method to rope in the group of people behind him. If he used the same method again, he felt that this person should at least hesitate. As long as he hesitated, wouldn't it be easy to deal with Sichu Hua alone? He thought very well, but it attracted laughter. Chapter 1072. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. The noise grew louder and louder. Soon, Jiang Wenchang heard a fact that he could not believe from the whispers and jokes. Back then, Sichu Hua had promised more than half of the things that he had given out for his own use. He had indeed given out almost 2/3 of his collection. The Sichu clan had a huge collection to begin with. 2/3 of their wealth was an astronomical figure. Even if they sold the entire Jiang clan, they would not be able to gather such a huge sum. Not to mention doubling it. 2 Jiang clans might not even be able to gather that much. Even if 3 Jiang clans were to be added together, the value would barely be enough. Under such circumstances, if Qin Yu had really agreed, He would not have been able to take out so many things. Jiang Wenchang could not believe it when he heard the truth. He even felt that he must have been cheated. How could someone take out so many things just to get an expert to stand by their side and help them? Even though he had invited so many people this time, he had only expected to give out half of the Situ clan's collection. However, Qin Yu alone has already defeated so many people. How can he dare to believe this? However, I don't believe it. This must be a scam. Do you think I'll believe such an idiot's words? Using more than half of the clan's wealth in exchange for temporary help. If you really have the guts to do this, you'll bankrupt the clan sooner or later. You might as well not waste it and just give it to me. Situ Hua looked at them with a half-smile. This guy had always been stupid. Moreover, he was born in a small clan and had no knowledge at all. He did not know how terrifying a true powerhouse could be. Previously, he had burned his boats by spending this sum of money. After that, this was the only good thing about him now. After all, he had great foresight. The Situ clan could not be compared to this pair of master and disciple. That was why he had acted so decisively earlier. This time, he might be able to get some help at a crucial time. Looking at it from a long-term perspective, it was definitely a win-win situation for him. This matter, Qin Yu interrupted Situ Hua before he could finish his sentence. It's not to help you this time. It's just that I can't stand it. Jiang Wenchang had a bad feeling. He also knew how terrifying the great power that Qin Yu had displayed earlier was. At this moment, he didn't dare to delay at all and directly hid in the crowd. With so many people between them, he wouldn't be seriously hurt. The others were also too extreme. They were blinded by the benefits in front of them. He immediately rushed forward. This time, a total of 7 people rushed up. All 7 of them had arrived at Senzun. 2 of them had even reached the late stage. Even with such a powerful force, he still had to use such a despicable method. It was indeed shameful to snatch something that belonged to someone else. Qin Yu now had the strength of a late-stage Senzun. Moreover, he had just used the power of an Azura, so it was inevitable that he would lose control of it. Although his willpower was extremely strong and he could completely control this power that did not originally belong to him, he was still able to control it. However, he was more or less affected. If someone ran over to die, he would fulfill their wish. Since they were all here, he might as well leave no one behind. The 7 people surrounded him from all directions. However, they were not a team after all, and there was not much tacit understanding to speak of. Each of them had their own ideas. These people had completely blocked off all the escape routes from all directions. One of them was good at beast taming. He was actually riding an extremely beautiful white crane. Standing in the air and constantly attacking from a distance, it was extremely troublesome. The others were guarding everywhere, completely surrounding him. Such a tight encirclement was almost completely covered, so no one could see Qin Yu's figure. Suddenly, in some of the gaps where this group of people came into contact with each other, there was a burst of bright light. After a series of screams, these people were all sent flying and smashed heavily. And Qin Yu was still unscathed. As long as he was serious, these people were no match for him. In this way, Situ Hua naturally struck while the iron was hot. He let those old seniors in the clan who were not involved in the dispute but had some strength take action. They could more or less share some of the pressure on Qin Yu. However, since this group of people appeared, they did not play any role at all. Qin Yu alone had already held back 5 or 6 people. The last remaining one was too timid to go over, so he was barely able to escape with his life. Jiang Wenchang was already prepared with a pale face. He would take advantage of the chaos to find an opportunity to escape. It would be best if he could run far away and find a place where no one knew him. In this way, no one would be able to find him anymore. Now, so many people were all dead. The Jiang family would definitely not have a good ending. He could see this very clearly. As one of the people who participated, he was very clear about this. This time, he had to go back in one piece, but he did not bring back a single person. He would definitely be severely punished. The best thing to do was to take advantage of the fact that the news had not completely spread. No one would pay attention to him. He quickly packed his bags and the belongings that he had accumulated over the years. He ran as far as he could and rolled as fast as he could. However, just as he ran out of the door, before he could quickly return to the clan, suddenly, a white silk appeared and directly rolled him back. Like a tightly wrapped spring silkworm, he fell among the crowd. He looked quite embarrassed. A corner of the white silk was even stuffed into his mouth. He could not speak or spit it out. He appeared in front of everyone in such a sorry state. His face turned blue, but he could not say a word. You actually still want to run? Do you want to abandon these people and roll as far as you can? Sichu Hua did not hesitate to expose the last bit of thin skin on Jiang Wenchang's face. He wanted to run away from him easily. How could it be so easy? Many of these people had nothing to do with the Jiang family. These people had been wronged. However, they found that Jiang Wenchang, one of the main culprits, wanted to run away. They would definitely be angry. It would be troublesome to kill all of these people. If Qin Yu did not have the intention to kill all of them, it would more or less bring some great trouble to the Jiang family. As expected, those who were still alive all looked at Jiang Wenchang with hatred. Now that they could not even protect themselves, Jiang Wenchang actually wanted to abandon them. The benefits that were originally agreed upon were now gone. Even their lives were in danger. Heads fell to the ground one by one. Jiang Wenchang was so scared that his eyes rolled back. A puddle of water appeared on the ground. Chapter 1073. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. Jiang Wenchang, who was in a sorry state, was sent back to the Jiang family. Countless people gathered to watch the show. Among them was the Qi family, who had not shown up and watched the tigers fight. This time, they were also secretly watching everything. The few elders of the Jiang family could not sit still anymore and stood out. However, the situation now was too bad. The moment they saw Jiang Wenchang, they immediately denied everything they had done. Even a discerning person could tell. How was it possible for Jiang Wenchang to rope in so many experts by himself? However, all of these old ancestors were adamant about it. They did not know at all. It was Jiang Wenchang who acted on his own accord. Also, no one was able to truly grasp their weakness. Unless someone could produce evidence. Jiang Wenchang looked at the countless people around him. How could he not know what would happen to him in the future? Compared to the entire big family, of course, no one cared about his life and death. Even if he was the most favored young master, he was still used to pay for his crimes in the end. I'm not convinced. Why? I didn't do this at all. You guys told me over and over again. You said that the Sichu family was big and had countless wealth. When the time comes, if you could give me a little, it would be piled up like a mountain. At that time, you said it was easy to get. Why are all of you scared now? If you have the ability, all of you should stand out. If he really admitted to such a big crime, there would be no wealth. Not to mention obtaining any benefits. From then on, he would definitely die. If that really happened, no one would care about what a person like him was doing or thinking. He would die in some corner that no one cared about. Even if he was thrown into a mass grave and eaten by a wild dog that came out of nowhere. No one would care about what happened to him. Qin Yu moved his fingers. The white silk that had been wrapped around Jiang Wenchang's body loosened and returned to his hand. He received a signal that he was going to be released. Jiang Wenchang thought that he saw hope. At this moment, he only said a few words and temporarily let go of the restraint on him. If he said more, he would have revealed a lot of things that the outside world would never know. Would he be able to atone for his crimes? He did not ask for much, as long as he could save his life. Furthermore, he allowed him to take away the wealth that he had accumulated over the years. When that time came, no one would be able to find him. Not to mention the revenge of the Jiang family, who could not even protect themselves. The elders of the Jiang family were furious. However, under the watchful eyes of the crowd, he could only threaten them verbally. Even though he had already endured to the extreme, he still cared about his last shred of face. He did not make a move in front of everyone, but his expression was extremely ugly. He couldn't wait to kill this unfilial grandson of his. It could be said that the last bit of hidden danger had been removed. When the time came, there would be no evidence. Who could say that they knew? They could just casually pull out a few scapegoats. That way, they would be able to maintain their position in the clan. No one could tolerate a family that was unscrupulous, even if it was the most suitable choice for them. If the Situ clan was truly past its prime, he might as well give it to them for free, so as to avoid being used by a bunch of trash for so many years and wasting large amounts of resources. What a pity that would be. This dog-eat-dog scene was a good show for everyone to watch. In particular, the Chi family, which was ranked second, was even more vigilant. At least for now, they could not easily provoke the Situ clan. It was not because of that little brat, Situ Hua. It was only because of Qin Yu. This person's identity was unknown, but he was extremely powerful. The strength of the people that Jiang Wenchang brought with him was already extremely strong. Although the Qi family could bring out more people and more powerful people, the Qi family could not afford to do so. However, they did not have absolute confidence that they could win. Now that the Situ clan's foundation was still there, they still had a chance to snatch the position of the number one clan in the competition later. There was no need to use such underhanded means to snatch it now. There were plenty of above-board means. Those who originally wanted to make a move on the Situ clan were all discouraged. They were not prepared to get involved in this. Otherwise, they would end up like the Jiang family in the future. These people were dog-eat-dog. In one breath, they revealed a lot of secrets from many years ago. At that time, the Jiang family had not yet climbed to their current position. They were just a small, medium-sized clan. At that time, Jiang Wenchang was already born because his talent was not bad. He was considered to be a key nurture, so he knew a lot of things. At this moment, regardless of whether it was true or not, he revealed everything in one breath. In an instant, the Jiang family became the target of public criticism. These things could not be brought out in the open. If they were really brought out in the open, those things that no one suspected back then, it would become full of loopholes. If some people continued to investigate, it would be extremely easy to find out everything that they had done back then. Unfortunately, whether it was a guess or not, now that they were dog-eat-dog, there were many questions that could not be solved. After this argument, many people found the answer. At this moment, the elders also found out. The more they continued to argue like this, the more they would be exposed. They might as well not continue to hide. After all, there were so many people present. It was not that they did not have a good relationship with the Jiang family. Jiang Wenchang did know a lot of things. However, he didn't know everything. With this thought in mind, he simply went all out and admitted most of the things in one breath. However, after that, he sought an alliance with the people around him. However, some people who were originally in cahoots with them were a little uncertain now. During the argument just now, they revealed themselves. Partners who had been cheated by the Jiang family. There were countless of them. There were even some who were completely unable to regain their former glory after being cheated. The Jiang family was able to have their current status and glory. It was not unrelated to those who had been cheated by them. Just like that, they had annexed all the way. In addition, they were indeed quite lucky. They also had some status. However, in essence, they were still from a grassroots background. Even their views had not changed much. Until now, they still liked to use force to seize power. However, the Jiang family's current strength could not be underestimated. These people were angry and joined forces to attack. However, they could only be beaten back. Only then did their minds clear a little. Even if everything in the past was related to the Jiang family, it was not easy for them to shake this big tree together. Therefore, some people took the initiative to set their sights on Qin Yu. Indeed, they could not shake this big tree, but it did not mean that others could not. Now, the Jiang family had courted death and provoked an existence that they could not afford to provoke. Could they watch all these scourges die with their own eyes? Chapter 1074. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. I beg you to get rid of all these despicable people in one fell swoop. That's right. If there was anyone who had such powerful strength now, he could forget all these people. and let them all be punished. Among the people present, only Qin Yu, whose identity and origin were unknown from the beginning to the end, possessed such strength. Those who were dissatisfied or wanted to take advantage of this opportunity. Those who attacked the Jiang family all looked at him with anticipation. They looked at Qin Yu. Some of them looked at Sichu Hua. After all, he was brought here by Sichu Hua. Among the people present, only Sichu Hua had the ability to speak a few sentences with Qin Yu. However, Sichu Hua would never interfere in this matter. He was not qualified to interfere. They seemed to be certain that they would not be a threat. Some of the elders of the Jiang family had completely let go this time. They had thought it through. After all, they had powerful strength. Falling out with them would cause them to face danger later. However, it would not cause them much trouble in the short term. There might be some trouble, but it was not worth mentioning at all. As long as they could live well, they could do a lot of things in the future. Are you done talking? What was unexpected was that Qin Yu, who had basically only been watching this farce ever since he arrived, was actually standing there. After the matter was basically confirmed, he opened his mouth to speak. The moment they heard this, some people were happy, while others were nervous. Jiang Wenchang, on the other hand, couldn't stop trembling. The last time he heard Qin Yu speak in such a relaxed tone. Not long after, he returned in defeat. The experts that he brought over all became corpses. After that, the Sichu family dealt with them, and the corpses no longer existed. Now that he heard this familiar tone, he did not dare to think about what would happen next. Before the others could react, Jiang Wenchang ran away. Anyway, no one would notice him at this moment. However, he forgot that he was arguing with the Jiang family members and others. They had been watching him all along. At this moment, he suddenly broke into a run. At this moment, he had already used all his strength to run. In the eyes of others, he had other plans. It turned out that the previous words were all to pave the way for him to escape easily. Jiang Wenchang didn't manage to escape and was quickly intercepted. However, since he was able to obtain his current position, he naturally had strength. He casually took out some of his trump cards that he would not have taken out just now. Taking advantage of the other people's confusion, he wanted to escape again. But it was another piece of white silk that tied him up from the most tricky angle. In the blink of an eye, he fell heavily to the ground. He fell in front of the elders. How many people does your Jiang family still have? Is everyone standing here? The elders only felt that the provocation in these words was too strong. Did he really look down on the strength of the elders? They were not confident that they could defeat Qin Yu. However, they had always been very powerful. Even if they didn't have enough people, it didn't mean that they had to ask everyone in the family to come up. He couldn't possibly win either. Forget it. The final result will be the same anyway. A gust of wind came from nowhere. However, this breeze was not enough to make people vigilant. Until the wind became stronger and stronger, and they could even feel a piercing pain when it blew on their bodies. A ball of dancing golden flame appeared in Qin Yu's hand. With the power of Shenron, the flame became brighter and brighter. It even carried a boiling hot intent that shot straight to the sky. As the wind grew stronger and stronger. Although it did not bring any danger or harm to the people. However, the power of the flame grew stronger and stronger. The wind fueled the flame. As soon as the flame landed, it quickly spread to the surroundings with an unstoppable force. All the people who were swept into the sea of fire could only scream. However, they could not get rid of or extinguish the bright golden flame on their bodies. The elders were caught off guard and more or less touched by the flame. Jiang Wenchang, on the other hand, didn't even have the chance to scream. He had been repeatedly injured and frightened. He couldn't get out of the flame no matter how hard he tried. In the end, he directly crippled himself. In the flame, he turned into a pile of black ashes in the blink of an eye. However, he was only the first person to die. There were also many people who would turn into dust in the flames and disappear from the world. The elders standing at the front were the first to be attacked. The attendants around the elders had long been reduced to dust. Only the elders could barely react at this moment. However, the flame burned bigger and bigger. Some of the elders could dodge it, while some couldn't. However, even if they could dodge it, they couldn't escape the encirclement of the flame. They could only make the flame leave their bodies temporarily. These were all people who seized the critical moment and cut off the connection between the flame and themselves very neatly. The others who didn't have time to do so were turned into ashes one after another. This should have been the scene that everyone wanted to see. However, seeing the huge Jiang family appear in the sea of fire in an instant. This meant that his flames did not intend to spread over and burn them as well. However, no one dared to approach those experts that they were afraid of. All of them turned into ashes in this fire. They didn't think that their strength could really compare to an entire family. None of the members of the Jiang family had the ability to resist. This already showed the power of the flame. Qin Yu glanced at his palm. He only tried to add some of Shenren's power into it. The effect was unexpectedly good. The power that was originally added together with those elders. Even if there was no way to extinguish the flame, they wouldn't be besieged by the flame so quickly. There was no defense at all. The reason for this was that Shenren's power had been added. The heat and temperature of the flame increased a little. It made them a little overwhelmed. Originally, it was a wisp of divine fire that had been scattered, and Shenren's power had strengthened it. Of course, these ordinary people couldn't escape. The members of the Jiang family weren't very powerful to begin with. They could block the endless flame. If it was slightly weaker, they might be able to suppress it with their powerful strength. However, in the situation where they were suppressed by the flame, their moves would only bring them greater disaster. If the wind was weak, it would only help the flame and not extinguish it. Crackling sounds could be heard as the flames burned. Most of the people avoided the source of the sound as if they were afraid of it. Chapter 1075. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. The once glorious Jiang family was annihilated just like that. They didn't even leave a single survivor. Everything was destroyed in an instant. It was because they were blind and offended someone they shouldn't have offended. From then on, the words Qin Yu became taboo. Very few people knew why. However, those who knew about it all kept their mouths tightly shut without exception. They also kept the mouths of the people around them. That person was not someone they could easily talk about. Sichu Hua was even more clear about Qin Yu's speed of improvement. The next time they met, they might see each other break through on the sky screen. Now that Qin Yu had arrived in Shenzhen, if he could get some opportunities, he might even be able to break through to the true God realm. Just like Shentian Senzun. This pair of master and disciple might become the only two divine venerables in the world. The Earth realm was extremely smooth. Although there were many experts there, it didn't develop. There were tribes everywhere. The scene was extremely chaotic for a while. Perhaps it was due to his good luck this time. Qin Yu immediately sensed the Kuan Earth Divine Dragon's presence as soon as he landed. This time, he didn't spend much words and didn't make any earth-shattering movements. After he expressed his intention, Shenron took the initiative to follow Qin Yu. It was also because he took the initiative to submit that the conditions of the contract were not harsh. The Kuan Earth Divine Dragon swore its loyalty obediently. Qin Yu, however, takes a walk around this place as usual, looking at the sceneries of the various large tribes. Occasionally, he left something behind and used it to benefit everyone for a lifetime. Those who had been helped remembered that there was such a person in this world. It was a pity that Qin Yu had only appeared for a short time. Otherwise, he might have left behind a legend. After more than a month, he returned to the immortal world again. This land was still the most familiar. But this time, he didn't come to find those who he used to be familiar with to talk about the old days. Instead, he came to find the bright Shenron. After arriving here, Kanshui Shenron recalled some things and could not help but feel a little emotional. When he received the summons, it was because he had fought with Qin Yu. It caused the surrounding space to become unstable, and it just so happened that someone had taken advantage of the loophole. As a result, a huge mess was created. The light Shenron had chased after him because of this. It was just that the two of them hadn't had a chance to speak properly for many years. As a fellow Shenron, Guangming Shenron couldn't do anything to him in the end. However, he did not expect that after this incident, he would still pay the price. "Are you here to look for Guangming Shenron? Why don't I take you there now?" Qin Yu refused. Since it was a place he was once familiar with, he would walk there himself. It wouldn't take long, and there was no need for anyone to take him away. In this way, it would take at most 10 days to half a month to reach Shenron. In the past, when he went to an exchange meeting, he could walk for more than half a month. However, things were different now. Even if he wanted to travel all over the immortal world, to him, it was just a matter of a month. If he wanted to reach a place quickly, it would even take a day or two. There was no place that he couldn't go. With the peak strength of Senzun, he could already come and go as he pleased. If he could reach a higher level, he could cross time and space. It was just a thought. At that time, creating a world was his pursuit. Qin Yu was well aware of his own strength. With his current progress, it wouldn't be long before he could comprehend that higher realm. If he didn't take advantage of the fact that his strength hadn't increased yet. After walking around and gaining a deeper understanding of this world. If he really reached the true God realm, everything he could see would be even more different from the different realms. The place where he first settled down, Misty, was still the same as before. Moreover, he had been gone for so long, and there were still many stories and legends about him left behind. They hadn't completely dissipated until now, and all the people he knew got along well with him. He only went to take a look at the giant Dragon Valley and the Dragon Temple. Their development could only be considered mediocre over the years. There wasn't any good development at all. Especially since the Dragon Temple had long disappeared without a trace. After he got rid of the Dark Dragon God, this big force still existed. But it had always been keeping its tail between its legs. Otherwise, they would have already lost the Dragon God that they believed in. What could they use to establish a foothold in this world where the strong were respected? But with the help of the prestige from the previous few stops, it could also be considered a small force with a little reputation. But because they lost the protection of the Dragon God, the development of the Dragon Temple could be said to be getting worse and worse. They hadn't made great progress. In the Dragon Temple, a white-haired man had a worried look on his face. Now, they had long lost their master. But they couldn't find a real strong person who could bring them protection. They didn't have the slightest bit of nostalgia for the original Dark Dragon God, only resentment. Originally, they bowed their heads for the sake of powerful strength. But the Dark Dragon God was so easily defeated in the hands of others without understanding why. After he died, he even caused them a lot of trouble. If they weren't in the immortal world now and not the Dark Realm, who knows how many people would have pounced on him and gnawed on his bones? With their current awkward status, they could only barely establish a foothold here. No matter where they went, they would only end up in an extremely miserable state. Suddenly, the white-haired man moved slightly. He seemed to have felt that there was a super strong person. No, it seemed that a venerable who was even more powerful than the Dark Shenron had arrived. Thinking of the blow he had suffered now and the difficulty of not having anyone to protect him, the white-haired man felt that this should be a chance given to him by the heavens. It was a great opportunity for him to regain his backing and stand at the top of this world again. That white-haired man still had some strength. To be able to hold on until now with the strength of an immortal. He could still be safe and sound. That was why it was difficult to move forward. He might be able to hold on until now. He had already proven that he was a capable person, and he didn't lack his own ambition. Previously, he was still borrowing the name of the Dark Dragon God. It was only because he hadn't found a better backer yet. If he could successfully curry favor with a super venerable this time, he would be able to get on the boat of a super venerable. He would be safe and sound after that. Qin Yu's whereabouts were hidden, but he didn't deliberately hide it. If someone were to investigate carefully, they would be able to find him. But generally speaking, not many people would deliberately check the identity of a passerby. Qin Yu was just about to return to Cloud County to take a look at the person who was determined to be his disciple back then. How hard had he worked now? Chapter 1076. Before seeing Qin Yu, the white-haired man had already made a series of preparations. To an expert, The only thing he could offer was loyalty and his lowly life. But the strong didn't need people like him. So he had to think of some other ways to catch the eyes of the strong. What surprised him was that there weren't many people following Qin Yu. There was only one woman, and it seemed that the two of them were traveling together. In this way, the white-haired man could dress himself up a little more low-key. He racked his brains and came up with a series of perfect plans. Money, fame, power, and beauty. Even if Qin Yu wasn't interested in any of these, he still held a secret that no one knew. This secret was of no use to him. But it might be able to play a miraculous role at the critical moment. Let Qin Yu think that he was also powerful and a useful person. Everything was after seeing Qin Yu's face. Looking at that pair of calm eyes, Lin Mengya thought. The natural pressure that belonged to the strong almost made the white-haired man unable to stand. He was stunned, and the first sentence he said was not the words he had carefully prepared. It was a doubt that came from the bottom of his heart. Have we met before? This sentence really seemed a little awkward. The white-haired man's expression was already very ugly. He couldn't believe that what came out of his mouth was actually such an ordinary sentence. Even he himself couldn't believe it. If someone were to say such a thing to him one day, he would definitely sneer. These words didn't seem to have any credibility. Moreover, he himself felt that it was impossible. If he had seen such a powerful expert in the past, he definitely wouldn't have left no impression on him. Such strength, such a natural pressure on the weak. If he had seen it before, he would definitely remember it firmly. Even such a person who was stronger than the Dark Dragon God, he was sure that he would definitely have second thoughts. He didn't have much loyalty to the so-called Dark Dragon God to begin with. If he had really seen it before, how could it be just a familiar face? Although the white-haired man's face was blue and purple, Qin Yu was extremely calm from beginning to end. He had indeed met this person once, but it was only a single meeting. You spent so much effort to find out about my whereabouts, and now you've come to me. Don't tell me it's just to reminisce about the past. The white-haired man had long known that everything he did would not escape the eyes of the strong. However, he did not expect that he had actually met this expert before. It hadn't been that long since that incident, but now that he thought about it, he felt a little dazed. How long had it been? Or was Qin Yu pretending to be a pig to eat a tiger? He still believed in his own vision. Then, there was only one guess left that had the highest possibility. In such a short period of time, a person who hadn't even reached the immortal monarch realm had become a super venerable who was many times more powerful than the Dark Dragon God. Thinking of this, the white-haired man immediately knelt down. He prostrated himself on all fours as he spoke of his only capital. I have the bloodline of the Phoenix, so I know the habitat of the Phoenix clan. I am willing to use the power of my bloodline to lead Master to the habitat of the Phoenix clan. Although it was a little rushed, it was rare to meet such a powerful expert. A powerful expert who could break through to such a realm in such a short period of time. That was one of a kind in the world. If he couldn't even see through this, then he wouldn't be him. The Phoenix clan was, of course, extremely noble and powerful. However, the phoenixes in the ninefold divine realm had not been drawn out for many years. The habitat of the Phoenix clan was also extremely mysterious. I'm not interested. You can go find someone else. It was just the habitat of the Phoenix clan. If he wanted to go, it wouldn't be so troublesome. Although this person still had some capital, he could be considered to have something that many people could only dream of. However, to him, these things that others dreamed of were really not worth mentioning. The Phoenix clan did indeed have a unique advantage. Even compared to the Dragon clan, they were on par. However, there was no way they could be compared to the 9 great origins of Shenron. According to legend, the Phoenix clan also had the assistance of a divine bird. However, that divine bird had always been very mysterious. He didn't want to complicate matters. All in all, the bargaining chip in the white-haired man's hand was indeed very big for others. It was enough for him to have a certain right to speak wherever he went. However, to Qin Yu, this was the most ridiculous thing. Because he had never lacked these, and he didn't need others. Bai Li was even more panicked. Originally, He thought that this was a capital to take out. It should more or less make Qin Yu look at him differently. However, he didn't expect that not only did he not look at him differently, he wasn't even excited at all. He didn't care at all. He even asked him to go find someone else. However, if he could really find someone else, it wouldn't have been delayed until now. If it wasn't an absolute expert, he would never be willing to bow down so easily. It wasn't easy to meet an existence with extremely powerful talent in this world. If it was someone else, how could he be willing? Even when he did things, he was unwilling to do them. I can take you to the Dark Realm to find the treasures left behind by the Dark Dragon God. I can take you to find the secret of immortality. And I just want to stay by your side as an insignificant servant. The first two sentences couldn't make Qin Yu stop in his tracks. What so-called treasures? He had never bothered to pick up the trash left behind by others. What secret of immortality? In this world, only by increasing one's strength could one truly obtain a longer life. Perhaps for some old experts in their twilight years, the secret of immortality was enough to make them go crazy. However, he was now in his prime, and if he wanted to increase his strength, it was right in front of him. After reaching the true God level, the secret of immortality was even less worth mentioning. He only paused for a moment in the last sentence, but it was only for a moment. If you had been honest early, maybe I could have given you a minute. After Qin Yu left, the white-haired man sat on the ground somewhat dispiritedly. He didn't care about his image at all. At this moment, he was thinking about a question. Was he really wrong? Just now, he shouldn't have used such a method to try to attract Qin Yu's attention. Instead, he should have said what he wanted from the very beginning. Maybe Qin Yu would really give him a chance. However, now that they were separated, he didn't know how long it would be before they could meet again. Lan Feng awakened the indestructible divine body some time ago. I heard that the experts of various forces want to rope in the young city lord as their disciple. Such a great thing. Chapter 1077. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. There was a rumbling sound. One of them left with a pale face, clutching his abdomen in pain. He did not forget to leave behind a string of harsh words. Lan Feng had already chased them out for the umpteenth time. He found it hard to accept doing such things once or twice, but after doing so many times, he got used to it. At first, Lan Xia could not accept it either. These people were all experts sent by the various factions, and they were chased out just like that. Even if Lan Feng had a bright future, if he was being watched closely by others, he would be killed in the cradle. Wouldn't that be a waste of such great talent? Originally, he wanted to keep the peace, but there were too many uncertain things in this world. There were indeed some people who took advantage of the fact that they did not dare to resist and directly snatched people away. Plus, Lan Feng had already done the same thing too many times. He decided not to bother about it anymore. But among these people who were chased out, there was no lack of those who were truly prestigious. Experts who were good enough to be a good teacher. Tell me, are you still thinking about Qin Yu? Seeing Lan Feng remain silent, what else could Lan Xia not understand? But he was somewhat unable to accept it. I've already told you long ago, that's not even in the same world as us. Qin Yu's future is destined to be bright. Look at you, after you obtained the indestructible divine body, you barely raised your strength to immortal lord. But with his talent, he's probably already a sage king by now. Maybe he's thinking about how to raise his strength faster and break through to Senzun in a short period of time. Lan Xia's words made him feel a little guilty. But thinking about it, his progress would become slower and slower. Lan Feng's current achievements were already extremely terrifying. How could it be so easy to break through to the next realm in a short period of time? Lan Feng's temper had indeed been worn down during this period of time, but he was still extremely stubborn about taking someone as his teacher. The price to pay to awaken the indestructible divine body was unimaginable for ordinary people. Although it was extremely impressive, luck, strength, and endurance were all indispensable. He had also gone through many tests before he could barely possess the full power of the indestructible divine body. In his opinion, ordinary people were definitely not qualified to be his teacher. So these people who wanted to take in disciples were all chased back by him. He had always wanted to keep his promise. But at his current realm, he basically relied more on luck. If he was not lucky enough to awaken the indestructible divine body and land Shia, at this moment, there was no way he could maintain his extremely fast cultivation speed. But if he continued to advance, he would not be able to get a better legacy. He had to take in. Otherwise, he could only stagnation. Or perhaps he had gone mad from thinking too much about it. By then, all his efforts, his translation, Lan. Countless people laughed at him. Teacher Lan, master translation of master. If you still don't come back, your talented disciple will be forcefully taken away by someone else. Those people are crazy about taking in disciples. They even want to snatch me back. Because he too. As a result, many large sects, whose pride had been hurt, were even more unwilling to admit defeat and sent even more experts. It was all for the sake of making him obediently acknowledge him as his master. With such a strong disciple, those sects would naturally be able to gain face. It had already become a competition between the big powers. It was already turbulent and not very calm. In addition to the matter of taking in disciples, everyone was frustrated. No one knew where it came from. Whoever had the ability to take in this disciple would be worthy of being the number one master, regardless of whether it was for the title of number one or for this disciple with outstanding talent. Everyone took action. Some of them were calmer. Some people even wanted to tie him up and kidnap him when the time came. Then they told the public that he was willing to accept. And he cried and begged to be taken in. Who would be able to expose him then? Because of this, the small cloud immortal city had been in trouble recently. Qin Yu heard this chatter from not far away. Speaking of which, he had not decided to take in this little guy as his disciple. He actually called him master and rejected so many people. But now, he changed quite well. To be able to have such strength and improve at such a speed. For a prodigy who was originally considered to be quite talented, it was also an extremely difficult thing. In this world, to obtain opportunities, one had to endure danger. Lan Feng had already passed the initial test. He did not know if it was an illusion, but Lan Feng felt as if someone was looking at him. But he was holding the most valuable detection Dharma instrument on him. He looked around. But he did not find any strangers. Strange, could it be that I felt wrongly? As he walked forward, he seemed to have thrown the previous matter to the back of his mind. Lan Feng suddenly turned back and looked in a direction. That was the place where Qin Yu had stopped just now. But he only stopped for a moment. So now, there was almost no difference when he looked over. He could only conclude that he was a little too cautious and paranoid. But just as he was about to walk over and temporarily throw this strange phenomenon to the back of his mind, a new person appeared on the spot. And he seemed to have appeared out of thin air. Lan Feng did not see how this person appeared. He could not help but blink to make sure that his eyes were not playing tricks on him. No need to blink. I am right here. You were not deceived. Lan Feng started to wonder if someone had found out who the master that he truly acknowledged in his heart was. That was why he created an almost identical camouflage spell. In order to trick him out. As a bargaining chip in the fight between the major forces, he had experienced such means before. But none of them were as real as this one. So real that he felt that perhaps he had really seen Qin Yu again. Lan Feng did not hesitate at all. He pounced on him and called him master. Although he had many guesses and questions in his heart. But after all, there was a big difference between a real person and a camouflage spell. He would not be unable to recognize this. If he could not even recognize the master that he acknowledged, then he might as well just be kidnapped by others. This was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Master, you must have come back to take me in as your disciple. I've done my best. You can come and test my results. Lan Feng lifted his chin proudly. After all, he was just a young man. To have such achievements in such a short time made him feel that he was very impressive. The reason why he had been trying so hard earlier was to make Qin Yu have a whole new level of respect for him. Chapter 1078. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor, Endless Fantasy Translation. But the results of his hard work were enough to catch the world's attention. They couldn't enter Qin Yu's eyes at all. To him, these results could only be considered good. It could prove that Lan Feng had worked hard, but that was all. It wasn't enough to make him look at him in a different light. Lan Feng obviously didn't notice this. After not getting an answer, he still wanted to pursue it. He wanted to ask about Qin Yu's strength. Obviously, he was prepared to make Qin Yu his goal and continue to work hard. Originally, Qin Yu didn't want to hurt the confidence of a young man with some talent. But he kept being interrogated, so he could only show his current strength. But he just let go and didn't tell him about his current realm. Lan Feng's face turned pale. Now, Qin Yu didn't have to say anything. He could also understand that Qin Yu's strength improved faster than he imagined. This kind of strength was many times more powerful than his. If Qin Yu had so many changes, then it was no wonder. At this moment, Lan Feng felt that he wasn't qualified to be taken in as a disciple by such a powerful person. He was feeling complacent because of his own opportunity. But over there, Qin Yu's strength had already reached the top. In the whole ninefold divine realm, who dared to say that their strength was much stronger than Qin Yu's? With your current strength, can you destroy this city casually? Lan Feng was already guessing to a higher level. But after all, he didn't have much vision. Even though he was being sought after by many people recently and became a popular genius. But he hadn't been out of this city often. His estimation of the strongest experts in the outside world was also a little too low. It wasn't just a city. He didn't even need Qin Yu to use his full strength. As long as he wanted to, this city could be destroyed by him anytime. Just like the Jiang family back then, it was easily destroyed by him. One must know that the land occupied by a big family was comparable to a city. He could easily destroy a big family, leaving almost no survivors. Destroying a city was an even simpler matter. If you've seen more of the wider world, you won't ask this question. Standing in your current position, what you can see is already not enough. You need a master, or you can just go out and explore with your weapons. You need to have a deeper understanding of the world, or you'll only stop. Lan Feng didn't seem to understand. In fact, he didn't understand what this meant at all. But there was one thing he could understand. That was that he now needed a master, otherwise he wouldn't be able to develop. He knew about this point himself. But he didn't think those people. Originally, he didn't think those people to was as translation as Qin Yu. Now after he felt translation, now after he is translation now he that, his determination his to, those translation to translation their translation. They experts is translation OSS experts. None translation as translation at like at as a test that was that. They were to that they were inferior as to was to s to was to that if t had to atis maybe he would have been kidnapped in the end. At that time, no matter how unwilling he was, he could only compromise. But now, it was different. Lan Feng knelt down and kowtowed without hesitation. Since he couldn't do it without a master, he didn't think much of other people. He only had this one choice. As for whether Qin Yu would think highly of him or not, he didn't have so much time to think about it. Even if he didn't think highly of him, he had to give it a try. Maybe he would succeed. Take me as your disciple. I've been waiting for you here for a long time. The others can't even compare to 1/10,000th of you. Even if you don't take me as your disciple, you won't compromise easily. Lan Feng had made up his mind this time. No matter what the final result was, he couldn't compromise with those people. What did those people think of him as? Did they think he was omnipotent? Obviously, he didn't want to be the disciple of any of them. Yet, they still treated him as a bargaining chip. Anyway, those people added together couldn't even compare to Qin Yu's ability. At that moment, he couldn't care so much. He just followed his heart. The reason why Qin Yu appeared this time was because he had the same intention. since Lan Feng could withstand so much pressure. And he was indeed a person who could endure hardship. Then why couldn't he give him a chance? Moreover, did he need a reason to take him as a disciple? You can be my disciple, but I'll give you one last chance to choose. I don't have much time to teach you. Soon, I'll try to break through to real God and try to find the realm above real God. In a short period of time, you may have a huge breakthrough, or you may achieve nothing. If it's the former, it's okay. If it's the latter, I don't mind throwing you back to Lanshaw for your old age. After all, a useless piece of trash that couldn't be supported by mud only had this little value. Lan Feng only hesitated for a while when he heard that it would be difficult. Then, he thought things through. First of all, he wasn't that kind of person. Second, he had enough confidence in himself. Maybe other people would miss such a good opportunity. However, he had to make good use of this opportunity. Anyway, he didn't like other people. Qin Yu was willing to give him such a chance. He was already very surprised. As long as he could make good use of this opportunity. After that, he would be able to gain a lot from it. Even if he said it out loud, it would be enough to make him feel proud. Moreover, it was clear that he could learn even more things from Qin Yu. And it wasn't like other big and small forces, which were so troublesome. Since you've already agreed, there's no room for regret. Go and prepare the apprenticeship gift. Lan Feng was a little surprised. Then, he realized that he had already fulfilled his wish. In this way, the big problem of apprenticeship had been solved. Lanshaw didn't expect that one day, he would be able to see Qin Yu again. Previously, he could faintly see that Qin Yu wasn't an ordinary person. It was because of this guess that he had been extremely respectful. And he didn't dare to provoke Qin Yu. Even if he had left for so long, he had been letting him go. There were many rumors in the city. Now that they met again, it only made his guess become a reality. Not only was Qin Yu not in any danger, but his strength had also improved greatly. He couldn't tell to what extent he had improved. But at least one thing was, he was more terrifying than all the people he had seen. Chapter 1079. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. It made him tremble with fear. Originally, the father and son were very careful about this apprenticeship. They even prepared a lot of red tape. They wanted to make this thing more detailed. But at the last moment, Lanshaw suddenly removed most of the steps. The most important thing in this matter was sincerity. Moreover, according to his experience, Qin Yu might not necessarily like this kind of complicated and elaborate ceremony. He was afraid that when the time came, they would think that they had done their best, but it would be the wrong thing to do. Don't make things too complicated, especially for such a strong person. It's your honor that he is willing to take you as his disciple. But don't ask for more. Apprenticeship mostly depends on us, so don't let him get involved too much. Even for strong people, there was no such thing as exhaustion. But it was so complicated, so troublesome. Who knew if Qin Yu would lose his patience because of this? Even if he was just unhappy, Lanshaw wanted to avoid this situation. Lan Feng knew even less, so he didn't think of the more complicated things. In the end, when Qin Yu came again, a lot of the procedures were directly reduced. And this apprenticeship ceremony was only held in front of his own family, with only a few people knowing about it. Of course, the apprenticeship ceremony had to be made public. It was just that it was up to Qin Yu whether or not his master's identity was exposed. It could be said that he had thought it through very thoroughly. It was just that he was a little too careful in some places. Qin Yu drank the apprenticeship tea that Lan Feng personally brewed. The apprenticeship ceremony was coming to an end. Suddenly, a palm-sized bronze mirror appeared in his hand. Although it looked very simple and ordinary, it was extremely powerful. It could be used as a heart-protecting mirror. That bronze mirror could also shine through many illusions. This bronze mirror could be used to contact people far away, and it could also be used to set up a spirit formation. It could be used to increase one's cultivation. There were more and more uses, but each of them could be put to good use. Lan Feng couldn't help but feel a little excited when he received this gift. There were so many functions, and none of them were good things with useless functions. He had never seen it before. Logically speaking, it should have two functions. Furthermore, their functions were very powerful, which was already very valuable. Not to mention, not only was it convenient to carry around, it could also be used for defense, communication, cultivation, and so on. It could even see through illusions. All the functions listed here would be of great help to him. Obviously, no matter what kind of trouble he encountered in the future, all of them would come in handy. Wasn't it a bit too much of a waste to give him such an all-rounder? Waste. Since I've accepted you as my disciple, I naturally won't be short of these things. Do you think that with my current strength, I would be interested in these things? The copper mirror is only enough for you to use before you break through. After that, there was no way for it to be of much use. At the very least, after his strength increased, it would be a relatively ordinary item. Of course, its value would not decrease. Even if it was transferred to someone else, it could still be sold for an extremely high price. At least in the entire Cloud Immortal City, there were not many such treasures. Lan Feng couldn't help but be shocked. Initially, he only thought that Qin Yu had such strength. This kind of talent was the best candidate. At the very least, he was many times better than those sanctimonious hypocrites. Moreover, those people kept calling themselves experts. Compared to Qin Yu's talent, they were simply a bunch of trash. But now, holding the item in his hand that Qin Yu personally said was insignificant, he couldn't help but feel a little dazed. Even such a precious item was insignificant. He didn't dare to imagine what was the most precious item. Qin Yu didn't tell this new disciple how many treasures he had in his hands. The reason why he accepted this disciple was because he had a deeper consideration. The speed at which his strength increased was obviously much faster than ordinary people. Even a genius couldn't compare to 1/10,000th of him. With such a fast speed, Li Yunmu was able to move as fast as he could. As long as he could subdue all of Shenron, his strength would break through to a higher realm. It was an easy and natural thing to do. As for the realm above real God, even if he wasn't being arrogant, he already had a deep understanding of it, and his future path was already very smooth. Everything that was incomparably difficult in the eyes of others became natural to him. It was even natural. Lan Feng kept all these items in his arms with some trepidation and awe. But he still felt that it was a little unreal. He really succeeded in becoming a disciple. Not only did he succeed in becoming a disciple, but he also got a very, very good item. He didn't dare to think about such a good treasure before. As for the future, he might be able to hope for more. With such a powerful master, he could have anything he wanted. Qin Yu found it hard to understand Lan Feng's excitement. After all, these things were too common and ordinary for him. He still had many similar things that he could take out casually. Higher level ones were also very easy things. If it wasn't for the fact that this new disciple wouldn't be arrogant for a period of time, and he wouldn't be too proud and complacent because of the things he gave out and become lazy because of it, he could still take out more things. He could even directly increase a person's strength. With a lot of resources, it was very easy to increase one's strength. It was just that the more talented a person was, the more they were used to progressing step by step. Otherwise, there might be many drawbacks. For example, the state of mind and strength couldn't be compared. Another example was whether it would cause a loss of control of one's strength. All of this was an extremely profound knowledge. Lan Feng was confused, but he could still make out the meaning behind his words. It must be very meaningful. And these must be secrets that couldn't be passed on. These things were very important, so he memorized all of them. Qin Yu's disciple recruitment this time could be considered to have ended here. But just as he said, he didn't have much time to teach. But even so, Lan Feng could still quickly break through his strength under his guidance. 10 days was the limit of the time he could stay. It wasn't impossible for him to stay for more time. But if this continued, it would delay things. Moreover, this was already a great help to Lan Feng. If he stayed for longer, he might not be able to digest what he said at all. Now that his state was so high, just a few words of advice would be enough for Lan Feng to seriously learn for a long time. Chapter 1080. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor, Endless Fantasy Translation Shenron of Light had long known that there would be such a tribulation. So he didn't leave, but stayed in the place where he used to live. How could he not know that the place where he lived had been exposed long ago? Other than himself, there were not many people who could break through the shortcut here. He successfully entered the interior. But there were always exceptions in this world, even if most people didn't have that ability. But there was one person who definitely had such strength. And that person had already found them, in order to find them and subdue them. Perhaps this was fate. Except for him, most of Shenron had already recognized Qin Yu as their master. Even he himself probably couldn't escape this fate now. One after another, his brothers bowed their heads to Qin Yu. They couldn't escape. Even those who had resisted fiercely back then were now obedient. Shenron of Light already knew these things. He couldn't resist at all. After seeing Qin Yu, he almost didn't hesitate at all. When he was at a disadvantage in the competition with Qin Yu, he signed the contract without hesitation. But he didn't want to leave easily. He just wanted to protect this world. He didn't have any extra demands. He didn't want to see the outside world. He didn't want to see others make a fool of themselves, and he didn't want to improve his strength. Even if this was the pursuit of most of the original Shenron. But he just wanted to continue to stay here. Then he would quietly watch the changes in this world. Since you have already thought of your own path, I won't force you. After Qin Yu refined the essence and blood of Shenron in his hand. His strength was completely improved to the peak. Now he even had the ability to challenge the heavenly tribulation. But he had a feeling that he should wait until all the essence and blood of Shenron was collected. Then he would make a real breakthrough. At that time, it would be easy. Anyway, he wasn't in a hurry now. The essence and blood of Shenron was the most important thing. At the moment, this was also the most important thing for him. Shenron lowered its huge head with a serious look on its face. He knew that the fact that he could continue to stay was already Qin Yu's greatest tolerance for him. He no longer had any extravagant requests, only gratitude. As for the other members of Shenron, they all had their own ideas. If it weren't for the fact that they were unwilling, they could also request to return to their own world. Perhaps it was because the speed of Qin Yu's breakthrough had surprised them. He even had ambitions. She wanted to use the position beside Qin Yu to see if she could pursue more and see more places. The Light Shenron had no right to stop this. It didn't even have the right to make a fuss. This was because all Shenron children had an extremely powerful instinct from the moment they were born. That was to build a world that belonged to him. He wanted to see what it was like to be above a true god. But perhaps it was because he didn't have enough talent, or perhaps it was because there was a world that tied down all of Shenron. No matter how much he tried to increase his strength, it was also impossible to find out what realm was above a true god. But Qin Yu's speed of improvement was too fast, which surprised and shocked them. If she could see that even higher level of cultivation beside Qin Yu, maybe they could also benefit from it for life. It was as if Qin Yu's blue blood had never come. But after all, he had left a disciple in this world. Very few people knew his identity, but he still had a clone. Although with his current strength, he didn't need a clone at all. But after all, the clone used to have an identity. When he took in disciples, he used this identity. Many people who were exposed to the outside world had a feeling of fear. For this genius who used to be extremely popular. Most people also stopped thinking about it. At least the experts of those sects knew how they were in a difficult situation back then. They wagged their tails and begged for mercy. There was even a portion of them who later escaped and signed a master-servant contract. Of course, they couldn't do anything. Otherwise, if they found out, not to mention the power of the contract. If Qin Yu were to casually attack them, all of them would die. Under Lan Feng's curiosity, Qin Yu didn't hide anything from him and told him about the past. Lan Feng really couldn't help but want to go out and say it. Before leaving, Qin Yu didn't say too much. He hesitated and finally couldn't help but secretly leak the news. Everyone was in an uproar. It turned out that Qin Yu was the dragon who had only appeared once and extorted the entire immortal world. This could be said to be an uproar. Everyone couldn't hold it in. They all went to Shentian's sect to ask for an explanation. But the people of Shentian's sect also felt wronged. Back then, they were the ones who were cheated the most. Everyone was cheated. Why did they have to look for them? Was it just because Shentian Senzun was someone who walked out of their world? This was a little too unfair. Almost everyone thought so. Shentian's sect leader only felt as if he had eaten the most bitter Chinese herb. His mouth and heart were so bitter that it made him tremble. In the end, there was nothing he could do. He could only apologize and stand on the same side as everyone else. Of course, they only temporarily reached a united front. But they didn't have the guts to really attack Shentian Senzun's beloved disciple. What would Qin Yu, who had powerful strength, do? Although they didn't know that Shentian Senzun was now a divine master of a generation. But even the strength that he had shown before made them not dare to move. This time, he was originally prepared to go to the Dark Realm. But halfway there was a small accident. In the void, he was attacked all of a sudden. The attacker had been hiding in the thick fog and refused to show his figure. Only an extremely huge eye was revealed, which made people shudder when they saw it. With such a huge eye, one didn't know how huge the body was. Qin Yu looked at this eye and felt a sense of familiarity. Back then, when Kanshui Shenron was moving around, it created a small crack. In the end, it tore the entire sky apart. It was this guy. But what was its purpose? Just to get rid of this space-time? But why did it suddenly attack him? Qin Yu had many trump cards in his hands. Even if this monster faced him directly, he wouldn't be at a disadvantage. But this monster didn't have any intention of fighting with him at all. It had been hiding far away and only came over to interfere with his journey. In the end, it caused him to fall into a thundercloud. Of course, in the end, he was still unharmed, but he couldn't control where he landed. Now, he didn't know where he was. Looking at the lightning that had been flashing around him, Qin Yu had a rough guess. Chapter 1081. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. If his guess was right, then there was no need to leave. But what was in the void? What was it? Was it a void demon? It also seemed to be very, very powerful. If it was really a void demon, what was its purpose? The truly powerful void devils all had their own thoughts and wisdom. It was impossible for it to be a monster without any reason. Qin Yu, who suddenly fell from the sky, became the target of many people's attention. It seemed that everyone in the Thunder World was extremely bold, even strangers dared to approach. There was not much naivety, just pure curiosity. And they were indeed very bold. After one of them sensed the natural threat from Qin Yu's body, he immediately changed his mind. He could not help but want to take a closer look at the person who fell from the sky. However, before he succeeded, Qin Yu had already seen through everything in his surroundings. He took a step back and had a general understanding of this place. The customs of the Thunder World were also a little different from other places. This place had been hidden from the world for a long time, and there was almost no contact with the outside world. Of course, as a divine world, even if there was not much contact with the outside world, it was enough to be self-sufficient, and then develop into an independent world. Of course, the most powerful people here almost all had the surname Lei. Even if they did not have the surname Lei in the early stages, they would change it later on. Because this was an honor, and only people who were strong enough could have this honor. Who the hell are you? Where did you come from? Is there a world in the sky? Did you come from the city in the sky? He couldn't have escaped from the Thunderbird's nest, right? The Thunderbird was a kind of creature that made people tremble in fear. It was extremely tall, and it had a human body, with lightning all over its body. Of course, every feather was also extremely tough. It was also a very good material. Thunderbirds and humans hunted and guarded against each other. And the Thunderbird's nest was often all in the sky. The experts who were captured by the Thunderbirds were unknown. Countless Thunderbirds died in the hands of humans. The Thunderbird race was said to have the Phoenix bloodline, but they were extremely ugly. They had an eagle-like mouth and rock-like wings. And extremely sharp claws, looking like tigers and wolves. They were extremely wide. But in the past, although there were people who thought about whether they could tame these creatures as their own mounts. However, no one had ever succeeded. Everyone had died at the hands of the Thunderbird. Since then, it was a fight to the death. No. Excuse me, I want to go over. Fortunately, he didn't bring Xuelan along this time. Xuelan stayed in the immortal world to teach Lan Feng. After all, he would not be out for a long this time. At most, it would only be a few months. Xuelan during these months, she was staying in these few months. Xuelan. Keeping up with him would not be of much use. Translation while when translation when to translation while translation. This feeling of intimidation wasn't very strong. But it translation, everyone translation. Then, they subconsciously translation. After they stepped aside, everyone was still in disbelief. Why did they so? Was it because was? So much so that one look was enough to make everyone give way to him. But more people felt that this was not possible. It was even a little ridiculous. If a person could influence millions of people with their gaze alone, they would be able to do so. What kind of strength was this? Had he reached the peak of the world? But these people did not think that their guess was right. Qin Yu had already reached the peak to begin with. As long as there was no true God, his strength was the highest in the world. Leaving the place where the crowd was the densest, there were countless flashes of lightning around. And the shops around him had all kinds of lightning and treasures of all kinds of colors. But he had no interest in these things. So, he kept walking forward without looking to the side. He did not know how long he had walked, but he finally stood in front of a unique shop. It was also the only place where he could temporarily stay. This place could be said to be good in almost every aspect, but there was one point where the prices were too high. However, the gold coins here were very similar to the purple gold coins that he had stored before. So, he temporarily paid with the purple coins that he had not used before. But just as he took out the purple coins to replace the gold coins, the eyes of the person at the front desk immediately changed. Although these purple coins could be used in the Thunder world. But the price of these purple coins was very, very high. It was almost to the point of sky high. One purple coin could almost be compared to 10,000 ordinary gold coins. No matter how high the price was, it was impossible to spend 10,000 gold coins for a night. Moreover, Qin Yu did not take out 1 or 2 purple coins. It was a big bag. The receptionist could not count how many there were in such a big bag. Could it be 10, 100, or 1,000? Please wait here for a moment. I can't make the decision for such a big sum of money. The receptionist, who was originally pretty, was as gentle as water to Qin Yu. But unfortunately, Qin Yu did not care about all this. The woman could only run to the back angrily. Then, she pulled a middle-aged man and whispered into his ear for a long time. The two of them looked over from time to time. Soon, the woman disappeared. The middle-aged man walked over with a smile and saw the pile of purple coins. He began to estimate the value in his heart. With his eyesight, he could see that this half bag of purple coins was at least 1,000 gold coins. He could even judge that it should be around 1,100. His eyesight had almost never been wrong. It was very, very rare for there to be a mistake. So, he even dared to use his life as a guarantee. He had never seen so many luxurious purple coins. Naturally, he was very attentive to Qin Yu. But Qin Yu just wanted to stay here temporarily. If this extra money could help him find some information, it would be good. After all, he had a small mountain of these things. These funds were given to them by someone in the beginning. It was a few 100,000 gold coins. But they only took out a small pile. If he were to take out that mountain of purple coins, he would be able to do it. Most likely, everyone's jaws would drop in shock. You want to find information? I don't know what you want to find out. We also provide information here. Of course, he wanted to pull all this money into his pocket.